Welcome back to the channel. Today we will travel through the final pages of What If Issei Was Born with 4 Powers. Comment down what story you would like to see in the future. The link to the story will be in the description below. Now let's start. During their walk, the three were silent. Rainer and Asia were unwilling to start a conversation because they didn't want to ruin whatever chance they had with their love interest. Similarly, Issei refused to speak to them. Not because he didn't want to, since Asia's presence calmed him down to an unnatural level, but because he didn't want to say something that he would most definitely regret. And so, the trio kept walking in a somewhat awkward silence, which was also enjoyable for the girls, since they were able to be so close to the man they both liked. Who, from what they had picked up by his words to them several days ago, seemed to like them back as well. Since it was already late into the night, Issei and the girls got in the respective rooms in silence because the Haidu parents were asleep and they didn't want to wake them up by accident. All three fell asleep as well, mostly because Issei and Asia would go back to school the following morning, with the brunette getting to spar against his tenants as soon as he closed his eyes. Thus, the residents of the Haidu household were completely unaware that a certain person used this chance to sneak their way in. Or, more specifically, in Issei's bed, using said boy as a cuddly body pillow, naked as the day they were born. The spar came to an end after 4 hours of constant fighting, as if their lives were on the line. Yet, somehow, Issei found it the most enjoyable one since this routine started, even if he couldn't use his dragon-slaying magic as he did against Razor. It should be noted that all three were exhausted. After all, they had been fighting for 4 straight hours, using most of their abilities to the limits. It went without saying that all three were becoming stronger by doing this almost every night for as long as they could. It was when they stopped and sat down in a triangle on Zangetsu's island that they noticed something peculiar. More accurately, a certain presence in an intimately close proximity to Issei. What the hell? The brunette muttered in surprise and disbelief, his eyes wide and jaw slightly slack. Zangetsu laughed his ass off, clutching his stomach and doing various other gestures to show how amused he was by his wielder's predicament. Issei only glared heatedly at the sword spirit, but it was ruined by the clearly embarrassed blush on his cheeks. Greg, on the other hand, while also amused, was still as composed as ever. "Why are you so surprised by her attraction to you, partner?" he asked in genuine curiosity, effectively cutting off Zangetsu's laughter, who wanted to hear their wielder's explanation. The brunette frowned in thought as he looked at his lap. "I thought she was afraid of me," he found himself saying skeptically. "And she wasn't the only one." He added as an afterthought, but his frown became more prominent and equally sad as he remembered the faces of everyone in Ria's peerage sadly, including Asia and even Razor. He could easily imagine the trainer, Sona and her queen wearing similar looks as the aforementioned devils. "Until you have that talk, the one the devil maid suggested, to clear up everything, this is just your imagination," Drake said conversationally as he shifted to make himself more comfortable. "Plus, the fallen girl and the dragon tamer didn't seem afraid when the three of you walked back home. Only awkward," he added. The host of the dragon and the sword spirit had a look that clearly said that he wasn't entirely convinced. In fact, he seemed more conflicted than anything else. "Ping, you're an idiot." Zangetsu deadpanned, gaining the attention and another heated glare from the person he addressed, which he promptly ignored. "With your smarts, I can't believe you don't understand people at all." Issei became totally confused. "What do you mean?" "He means," Drake spoke up, calm as ever, earning his host's undivided attention. "That you misinterpreted the looks of fear from your allies. Yes, they were clearly afraid, but not at you," he explained before he added with a thoughtful hum. "Well, except for that Phoenix devil. He was the only one genuinely afraid of you." "I still don't get it," Issei said confusedly as his brows furrowed, finally getting conscious of the fact that he had caused someone genuine fear. Especially to a person that, up until a certain point, he had come to respect and maybe even see as a potential friend. Seeing that his host's mood was taking a rapid turn to the worst, the dragon sighed in exasperation and, before the sword spirit threw in the smartest joke or generally made this more difficult than necessary, he spoke again, albeit explaining more firmly to get his point across. "Partner, while you have extraordinary abilities in general, you need to remember that none of the people you came close with have ever seen something remotely close to them. While a dragon spewing flames from its mouth is most definitely not unheard of, for a human to do so should be all but impossible. And that's not even taking into account your other powers, or your physical attributes, for that matter. Like every living creature, it's logical for even supernatural species to fear something they don't know. So, yes, your allies were afraid of your abilities, instead of you. After all, you said it yourself to the Phoenix devil that not even the Gremory girl knew about your magic. Of course they would be so shocked to the point of fear. So, in the end, as the sword said, you're an idiot." Issei sighed tiredly, finishing the dragon's explanation on his own, while also showing that he completely understood everything that was said to him. Finally. Zangetsu said mockingly with a matching smirk as he crossed his arms against his chest. The brunette gave him the bird in response, which made the sword spirit laugh in amusement instead of being insulted. Satisfied that his words were heeded, Drake became calm again. After a moment of serene silence passed, Issei glanced to his left, where a clock was innocently sitting on a rock, telling him what time it was. On a side note, he found out that he could summon items in Zangetsu's world, while in Drake's realm, it was only possible to manifest a clock. The brunette sighed lightly in exasperation as he saw that it was time to wake up and start his day, if he wanted to do so ahead of everyone else in the house. Without another word, he faded away from his inner world, leaving behind a clearly amused Zangetsu and an uncaring Drake, who promptly went back to his realm and fell asleep. Issei opened his eyes, only to be greeted by the darkness of his room. Not that he had trouble seeing in the darkness, of course. And his still white ceiling, that he had no idea how to decorate it to make it less plain and boring. He felt his right arm being pressed into something soft and squishy, which made his head turn carefully towards it. He was met with the sight of a totally naked Ria's Gremory hugging his right arm in between her breasts. Looking at her face, he saw that she had a serene albeit cute expression as she slept comfortably. The brunette had a hard time controlling his urges and mentally cursed his teenage hormones, which were influenced by the draconic essence of the boosted gear and the equally draconic nature of his magic. So, as he forcefully suppressed those urges and the furious blush that threatened to appear on his cheeks, Issei carefully freed his arm from Ria's surprisingly firm grasp. He almost gave in at how erotic her disappointed moan sounded and the cute pout on her lips when he managed to set himself free. Shaking any and all lustful thoughts away, while also whispering a clearly embarrassed shut up. At Zangetsu's boisterous and amused laughter in his head, the Sekiryute started his day. He had a quick shower, got dressed in his school uniform, and then made a simple breakfast for everyone in the house. Including his uninvited guest. But, as his mother had taught him in his younger years, a guest was a guest, invited or otherwise. On a side note, he had been soundless in his movements, aside from his shower and the preparations for breakfast. Once he was almost finished with the last portion, which was his own, his sensitive ears caught the first sounds of most of the residents waking up. As quickly and silently as he could, he finished making breakfast and started on fixing sandwiches for the 4 people that would be out of the house during lunchtime. Namely Asia, his father, his uninvited guest and, of course, himself. Just as he finished with his second task, he heard a pair of footsteps coming in the kitchen. Kaden was the first one to go downstairs since she and her husband woke up together and she wanted to make him some breakfast before he left for his job. As she was descending the stairs, however, she noticed a light scent in the air coming from the kitchen. Her first thought was to go in full panic mode before her mind came to a grinding halt at a sudden thought. It had been 10 whole days since it was just her and Goro in the house. Which could only mean. My babies have come back home. She thought giddily as she entered the kitchen, ready to greet her 2 daughters working in harmony to make a surprise breakfast for the original Haidu family. Instead, she found herself blinking in surprise at the sight of her son being the only person in the kitchen. And the table is ready. All the while her son just looked at her in fond amusement. Good morning, Kaden. He greeted warmly as he took a seat at the head of the table. To her inner embarrassment, it took her a couple more seconds to process that her son had prepared everything after having to do so some months back. Even surprised, however, it didn't mean that she was less grateful or glad to see something like that again. Good morning, honey. She greeted back equally warmly with a radiant motherly smile that he loved to see each and every time. Also, she took the left seat at the other end of the table, where her husband would sit opposite to her son. Welcome back. Issei just allowed his warm smile to widen and nodded gratefully. It was then that Kaden took a look at the table, appreciating the sight of freshly made breakfast, even if simpler than usual, before she blinked in confusion at a peculiar detail that she noticed. There were 6 plates on the table, instead of the usual 5. Ice. What is it, Kaden? Why is there an additional plate on our table? At his mother's innocent question, Issei almost lost his composure as to how he should explain a certain Redeed's presence in the house. Alas, he couldn't lie to his mother, but he also couldn't tell her the full truth either. Well, me and the girls came back way past midnight. And because the president of my club was with us, it would be rude to send her away so late in the night. So, I suggested that she could stay here for the night, and she easily agreed. His casual explanation was no more than a twisted half-lie half-truth, but it was more than believable in the ears of his mother. Which was confirmed by her proud smile and nod of acknowledgement at his actions. Which, in turn, made him mentally cry in tears that he had to twist Ria's present so much in order to make it believable and that the girls would hopefully play along. "So where is your president sleeping?" Kaden asked, excited at the prospect of meeting a person close to her son. Without thinking, Issei answered with all the honesty his namesake was meant for. "In my room. My bed, more accurately," he said with an exasperated sigh as his eyes fell on his plate. He missed his mother's shocked expression before she seemingly forcefully regained her composure. "And where did you sleep?" "On my bed, of course," Issei replied calmly. Again, without thinking. It took a couple of seconds of awkward silence for the brunette to realize the implication of his answers, which made him groan in exasperated embarrassment. Especially when he saw the unreadable gaze of his mother. "Before you get any ideas, nothing happened," he said as seriously as he could. It was at that moment that another person entered the kitchen in a sleepy manner. A person that could either be Issei's savior or his impending doom. But nothing happened. Goro Haidu yawned as he made his presence known, uncaring that the first thing that came out of his mouth made no sense whatsoever. "Good morning," he yawned again right after he greeted. "Great to see you too, san." Issei deadpanned, his tone oozing sarcasm. Instead of scolding him like she would normally do, Kaden turned to her husband, who took the first sip of the coffee his son had made him earlier. "Goro-kun, our son just told me that his president is currently sleeping in his room, on his bed, where he slept as well when all the kids came back last night," she summarized emotionlessly. To his credit, the Haidu patriarch remained calm, but his expression matched his wife's as he turned to face her when he set his cup of coffee on the table. Issei was starting to sweat at the sudden tension in the air that his parents emitted. Then, suddenly, both grinned excitedly and faced him, leaving him completely dumbfounded. Especially from the cheering words that left their mouths. "Will I be a grandmother soon, thank you, Issei. Good job, son. Betting a girl other than the two obviously smitten with you. You make your 2 cent proud at making his dream come true." Issei felt like crying, once again. "Even though I just told Kachan that nothing happened," he moaned miserably in his head, while his expression was one of shock at their reactions. And, as if the universe wanting to dig his figurative grave deeper, "Oh, fuck me. What's this about Issei-kun getting laid with a girl other than me and Asia, Akasama, Otu-sama?" Rainer entered with a glare that had no heat towards the brunette, with an unhealthily blushing Asia at her side, both of whom took a seat to his right and left respectively. Once that was done, the still blushing Asia shot him a pouty glare, looking like she was on the verge of tears. His whole being almost melted at the sight. "Issei, and how could you?" the ex-nun admonished him. "Don't worry, Asia-chan." Rainer came to his rescue as she spoke confidently, even though she wasn't even looking at the blonde girl, smirking mischievously at the brunette. Issei, for his part, felt overwhelmed by this turn of events and could only look at the fallen angel girl in honest confusion. "We haven't lost yet. We can make our move tonight when Otu-sama and Akasama will fall asleep." Rainer's tone was completely serious and shameless, in spite of facial expression. Her words had the strange effect of instantly cheering up an even more embarrassed Asia, who said cheerfully, "Why yes, you're right, Rainer-san." Well, the parents got into their own little world, daydreaming about more grandbabies to spoil. Again, Issei couldn't keep up with this morning's happenings and felt like crying. Also, his head was ringing due to how loud Zangetsu was with his uncontrollable laughter, which didn't help his situation in the slightest. And Drake was sleeping like nothing was happening. Which, in hindsight, was true for the dragon's case, since he didn't care much about romantic affairs. Just then, the reason for the whole mess entered the kitchen. "Huaaa, good morning everyone." Everyone froze at the new voice. And the admittedly cute yawn. Ria's Gremory entered the kitchen, clad in her school uniform that Issei could have sworn he didn't see anywhere in his room, walking elegantly towards the only empty seat at the table, which was to Asia's left and Goru's right. Rainer and Asia were shocked by her appearance, judging by their gaping jaws and wide eyes. Kaden and Goru shared the same expressions as their daughters, albeit with blushes on their faces, totally entranced by the Redeed's beauty. Truth be told, Rainer matched Ria's in beauty, but she didn't emit the same elegance or general air of confidence like the Redeed did on a constant basis, which made the fallen angel feel a little insecure on the inside. Great Issei just sighed in resigned defeat, feeling like his uninvited guest just put the nails on his coffin. Ria's polite greeting went almost unheard due to the shock everyone else was experiencing. Well, in Issei's case, the acceptance of his fate. Before Rainer or Asia could blow his story with their reactions, Issei tried to salvage the situation as best as he could. "Good morning, Rias. Hope you slept well after you accepted our invitation to stay for the night." He greeted with faux politeness and a matching smile, playing the role of a welcoming host. The three girls caught onto the hidden message to play along with the charade, all equally caught off guard that he had thought of this, but also grateful that it would save some unwarranted reactions and possibly the Reteed's hypnotizing abilities. That said, even though it was an act, Ria's response was more than genuine in her words. "My sleep was wonderful, Ice. I have to say, you make an excellent body PILLOWUFUFUFU." Issei could have done without half of what she said, especially since she had this mischievous glint in her eyes and the teasing giggle she let out. Oh well. He hadn't forgotten that she was in need of punishment due to her actions at the rating game. And this whole situation presented the perfect incentive to go through with his initial decision. Although, he would make sure to make the punishment as humiliating as possible for the Reteed. And what better way to do it other than have the notoriously known sadistic queen of the peerage to perform it. As the lively morning at the Haidu household continued, Rias and Akeno felt chills down their spines, the latter more pleasant than the former. Which caused a Reteed to look at Issei's back as he washed the dishes and could only wonder why she felt that way. On the other hand, Akeno felt like masturbating for the upteenth time at the thought of punishing her king. Preferably with the help of a certain Sekirute. Both of their feelings magnified to a factor of 10 as they walked to school, with Rias having the company of her contracted magician and her bishop, while Akeno met up with Kaneko and Yudo a little away from school. Clearly, this day wouldn't end in a normal fashion. The school day ended without incident for Issei. Apart from the morning craziness, that is. And the fact that his classmates tried to not pay him any mind for his mere presence inside the same class as them. They were obviously still afraid of him. Something that the Sekirute had become accustomed to but didn't want to continue for much longer. Although, he didn't bother trying to think of a way to make amends with his classmates. The brunette and his blonde Italian friend were on their way to the Orc, walking side by side in comfortable silence, with the latter smiling serenely at the fact that she was close to the former, who was still trying to figure out how to punish the club's president. The two arrived at the clubroom, meeting the familiar sight of everyone else being there before them and already seated. However, their eyes widened in surprise at another familiar, yet totally unexpected presence. How didn't I send someone of his caliber? Issei couldn't help but think in a mixture of incredulousness and bewilderment. In spite of your power, partner, you're far too inexperienced to detect an excellently concealed presence such as his. Drake supplied reassuringly, which only made his host all the more anxious about something similar happening in the future, albeit with an enemy, rather than somebody close to the group. Issei took a silent deep breath to calm his nerves, slowly exhaling it after a couple of seconds. Being anxious wouldn't do anything in this situation. Especially since the surprising guest was friendly towards him a few days ago. In the back of his mind, though, he put the suggestion to start training on that aspect more the soonest he could. "Welcome, Haidu Issei-kun and Argento Asia-chan. I've been expecting you." The person in question greeted them jovially with a charming smile. Asia found herself bowing respectfully, even before her brain told her to, but couldn't greet back due to her shock. Issei, however, had regained his bearings. "Hello to you too, Surzicha-san." He greeted me somewhat politely. That's right. The surprising guest, who currently occupied one of the chairs in front of Ria's desk, was Surzicha's Lucifer himself. Oddly enough, Grafia didn't seem to accompany him, for some reason. Surzicha seemed amused at the young boy's lack of respect, same with Akeno. Yudo was smiling awkwardly, and Kaneko was too immersed in her sweets to pay any attention. As for Rias, she felt like facepalming at her contracted magician's behavior towards her brother, but didn't say anything, since the latter didn't seem to mind. A few moments later, Issei and Asia were on their usual seats, with the ex-nun almost clinging to the brunette due to how anxious she felt. Seeing that, the Mayu soothed her with his charismatic voice and matching smile. "Be at ease, Argento Asia-chan. Even if I've been expecting you, know that the two of you are not in any kind of trouble." The Italian girl visibly calmed down at that, but still remained silent, albeit with an awkward, appreciative smile on her lips. "Then, what do you want with us?" Issei asked curiously, not caring that he sounded rude to the highest-ranking devil. Rias was about to remedy that, but her brother's calm demeanor and raised hand stopped her from doing so. She remained on her seat and glared daggers at her contracted magician. And, much to her continuously rising agitation, he avoided her heated gaze without an ounce of care. Or, maybe, in her mind, he just wanted to annoy her. If he did, it was working perfectly. Akeno's amused UFUFUFU giggle at her obvious annoyance didn't help matters at all for Rias. Surzicha's wanted to laugh at his sister's state but chose to answer the brunette's question. "Actually, I came here just for you, Issei-kun." He clarified easily, before his expression turned into questioning. "I can call you Issei-kun, right?" "Yeah." The brunette shrugged carelessly. "As I've told everyone here before, I'm not one for formalities. Not to mention that your presence here seems more of a social visit than a business one," he added nonchalantly. "Perceptive." Surziches nodded in acknowledgement, mentally adding one more piece in his mind about the puzzle that was this generation's security. But not totally true. He added as an afterthought. Issei leaned back on the couch and crossed his arms against his chest, his face a mask of stoicism that Grafia, Sona and Tsubaki would be jealous of. I'm listening. There's no need to be defensive, Issei-kun. The man reassured with a placating gesture of his hands. Although, that said, I came here to talk about you in general. He admitted with a sheepish smile. What about? Issei frowned in suspicion, his body becoming battle-ready in a very subtle fashion that nobody outside of the Mayu caught on. Honestly, I would like to get to know you for my personal relief. Don't get me wrong, though, Issei-kun. From what little I've seen, I highly doubt that you have any ulterior motives or you mean any harm towards my sister and her peerage. That said, as the leader of the devil race, I am compelled to know what kind of powers you possess in order to appease myself and make the road for you to meet other devils in the future easier. Especially since you are my sister's contracted magician. Well, that in itself is reassuring and many devils respect power as almost all supernatural species, there are those that will be skeptical about you. And these are the people that I have to convince that you are our ally behind your back and closed doors. I do hope that you understand my point of view. Surziches explained thoroughly in a calm tone before he hydrated his throat with a Keno's exquisite tea and a few gulps from his glass of water. I'm not a leader, so I really don't. Issei replied casually before sighing in defeat. Though, I guess, I get your point. Surziches smiled in appreciation, while the others could only watch the exchange between the two most powerful beings they had ever encountered in silence and a mixture of anxiousness and trepidation. Aside from Kaneko, who only cared about her stomach almost all the time. Thank you, Issei-kun. The Mayu said gratefully before he looked at his sister. Riaz, can you, please, show me your contract with your magician? He asked politely. Riaz blinked twice in surprise at being addressed, but easily regained her composure. Yes, Ani-sama. She professionally nodded in acceptance. Then, she opened the drawer she had put it in and took it out, presenting it to the Mayu. Said person read it a couple of times to make sure he didn't miss any details before he looked back at his sister with an unreadable expression, making her slightly tremble at his gaze without changing her mask of professionalism. Riaz, this contract cannot continue in the future. He said calmly. Why? Riaz was obviously perplexed, as was everyone else. Including Issei. First and most important part, Issei-kun is not a devil. Therefore, he isn't compelled to perform devil duties such as contracts. Additionally, he, most definitely, cannot join your peerage in raiding games. Surziches stated firmly. Then, how come someone summoned him for a contract? Or, for the second part, he was allowed to participate in the raiding game against Razor. Riaz and Issei were the most confused out of everyone else, with Aridid voicing said sentiment. And her distaste towards her ex-fiancé was audible from how disgusted she sounded when she uttered his name. The Mayu chose not to comment on the latter, though. I don't know how or why Issei-kun got summoned, to tell you the truth. What I do know is that Issei-kun will not perform any more contracts. He may accompany one of you, but never actively participate. As for the raiding game, it was unofficial and neither Razor himself nor the Phoenix household in general were against the idea of a non-devil participating in it. Meaning that this was a one-time thing, thinking at the time that there wouldn't be someone that could help you out of the marriage contract. So, if you want for this contract to continue, you have to reincarnate Issei-kun as a devil. That's the only way to do so. So far, Surzich's explanation made a lot of sense to everyone inside the room. That said, Riaz was quite despotent about what she had heard a few seconds ago. It was as if she was told that she couldn't use her strongest evil piece in a raiding game and that said piece shouldn't even be considered a devil in the first place. The worst part was that it was true in every sense of the word, which made her feel quite bitter. Especially since she knew that she was nowhere near powerful enough to reincarnate the Sekirute as a devil. And she doubted that her brother would waste his remaining evil pieces to do such a thing, just for her to keep having the Bruna close to her and help her become number one in the ranks of raiding games. As for Issei, he didn't know what to feel about these revelations, but certainly didn't hold it against the Redid, who seemed to have manipulated their situation to her own benefit without thinking more about their contract at the time. That said, he wanted to keep Riaz and her peerage as his allies, possibly even add Sona and her own peerage. And, from their little interaction, he guessed that the Mayu before him was the best ally he could get. Then, there was the matter of Azazel and his rival, Vali. Should he tell the Mayu about them, or keep it a secret for now? Probably the latter, mostly because his instinct told him so. So Issei spoke up uncertainly, breaking the awkward silence that had befallen the room. What now? He asked curiously. Surziches sighed lightly, showing how displeased he was that he had to do this to his sister, before he spoke. Unless you desire to become a devil, Issei-kun, you have to sign another contract with Riaz. And, if you do become a devil, there will be no need for something like that. However, you will become my sister's underling like everyone else in the room, and you will be expected to act as such, at the very least, in front of others. He explained as simply as he could. The room became tensely silent as all pairs of eyes turned to look at Issei expectantly with bated breaths. The brunette closed his eyes, and a thoughtful frown appeared on his face as he took in the information from the Mao. Did he want to become a devil? Truthfully, he didn't know if he wanted to. However, he was pretty sure that he didn't want to be someone else's underling. Even if it said someone was somebody like Ria's. If you become a devil, you'll gain a weakness towards light, partner. Meaning that, if someone like the fallen angel at your home was to catch you off guard, they would be able to kill you, in spite of the high-speed regeneration you have due to the sword. The dragon in his soul supplied helpfully. That's the same even if I don't become one, Drag. Issei argued mentally. Even though you have a human body, it's sturdier than a dragon king's, partner. Or, maybe, my own and Albion's. That will change if you become anything else. Devils are weak to light powers. Fallen angels, while not weak to devil powers, can be killed by them. Dragons are weak to anything that has to do with dragon slaying, but can also be killed by stronger beings, or if they are overwhelmed in numbers. So far, you've proved my point. Issei stated in confusion to the dragon's explanation, before remembering some vital parts, and his mind started thinking on them, with Drake patiently waiting for his host to see the point in this argument. According to what the two had mentally discussed, Issei would have already been a goner if he was a devil. He had been lucky that the one time he was caught slightly off guard it was Donasik who chose to start a conversation at the time, instead of outright attacking him, as soon as the fallen angel had the chance. If he had been a weak devil, that is, but the point still stood. He doubted that any dragon-slaying artifacts would have an effect on him, since he had dragon-slaying abilities of his own. And extremely powerful ones at that. So, in theory, even if he somehow managed to make himself a dragon in the human body, he wouldn't be affected in the slightest. Back to the argument, though, the brunette realized that it was pointless, due to the fact that he absolutely refused to take orders from anyone, just like a dragon should be. Issei ignored the amused huffs from both of his soul's tenants at his realization, and opened his eyes to lock gazes with the patiently waiting Mao, while also ignoring everyone else in the room. I don't want to become a devil. He stated firmly, choosing to ignore the clearly downtrodden auras from the rest of the devils in the room, especially the one sitting beside him. So, you want to be a free securite? Serziches asked curiously with a raised eyebrow. Yes and no. The securite replied evenly. The Mao gestured at him to explain with a motion of his hand, his expression utterly unreadable. If Issei was a weaker man with a fragile will, he would have trembled under such a gaze. Alas, he wasn't and met the Mao's gaze with an air of calm and confidence as he explained his reasoning in a matching fashion, albeit not revealing the true nature of most of his powers. Bending the truth wasn't outright lying, after all. And half-truth sometimes meant that someone chose to tell part of the truth, not lie to another's face. That's a lesson Issei learned just now as he spoke. My sword spirit once told me that I'm destined to protect the world one day. I chose to accept that and continuously train myself to become as powerful as I can be. Doing so under somebody else, while not impossible, it will hinder that goal in the long run, since I won't have enough freedom to move as I please. No matter if it's Ria's, Sona, or even yourself. The same goes for any other faction you can think of. However, that's not the case if I'm a free Red Dragon Emperor. I'll have all the freedom to do what I want and need to do for anyone and anything I please. That said, I know I can't protect the whole world on my own, and that I need allies. Ria's in her peerage. While young and inexperienced like myself, are all good people at heart, and that's why I agreed so readily and signed the contract with her. Admittedly, it didn't benefit me all that much, aside from the financial details, but it was a step for me to be allies with her, and, possibly, anyone else that's as good a person as Ria's is. While the young devils, even Kaneko, were breathlessly entranced and awed by the brunette's monologue, Serziches smiled in satisfaction at what he heard. From his experience at reading people, the Mao could tell that the young brunette was totally and utterly honest in his words. Also, while still interested in the boy's powers, he didn't deem them a priority to know about at this time. That said, the highest-ranking devil detected something that only experienced war veterans like himself could do on the boy. Issei Haidu had such an immense amount of charisma that possibly rivaled, if not outright surpassed, that of his own, Michael's and Azazel's. Combined. Not just individually. For someone so young to have such a power was ludicrous, not to mention dangerous at the wrong hands, but Serziches chose not to see it in a negative way. Instead, the Mao saw powerful individual negotiating terms to their alliance. And he was more than happy to oblige, if a bit fairly towards both sides. Even if he was a recognized Sis Khan, Serziches Lucifer was also the leader of devils. As such, he couldn't show any bias in this kind of situation. I see. The Crimson Satan muttered pleasantly with a matching smile, his voice breaking the younger devils out of their trance-like state. How about I propose a new contract between you and my sister, since I'm here? Due to my experience in politics, I assure you that it'll be beneficial on both sides. It'll be written by yours truly, signed by myself, Riaz and you, Issei-kun. He suggested. I'm listening. Issei was quick to say calmly, before Riaz could do or say anything to jeopardize an opportunity like this. Well, basically, you'll help my sister in Kuo and appear at formal meetings as her contracted magician. While at the latter, you have to show that she's in control, until it will be established that you're an ally of all devils, not just my sister, in order for you to act like you normally would. Outside of that, you're free to do as you please. Even I don't even have the authority to tell you as to whom you can befriend. That is, unless the people you befriend want to hurt my sister or the devil race in general, only then will I intervene in some way or another. Also, you'll have a standard monthly paycheck, in which can be added more depending on what you may have done to help Riaz. For example, if you defeat a stray devil, or passively help anyone in the peerage with their contracts. Additionally, if there are any militaristic achievements, you'll be rewarded even more handsomely, seen to that by yours truly if need be. Lastly, I'll sweeten the deal and have Riaz help you find a familiar of your preference, without Satuji-san's interference if you so wish, at a full moon of your own convenience. Issei almost accepted right then and there. After all, this new contract sounded way better than the one he had signed with Riaz. However, there was a glaring difference. One that had him pause on his immediate agreement. His participation in raiding games. Or, more accurately, the lack of it. The brunette understood the point that he had to be a devil to participate in one, but damn it, he wanted to test himself against various kinds of opponents, tactics and terrains. Not to mention that there could be certain restrictions in them that could potentially test his skills. Or even opponents that he could truly let loose on. The Seker didn't even notice that his face formed a frustrated expression. Everyone else did, though. And, while the younger devils became slightly worried, the highest-ranking one was just curious. Is something the matter with my proposal, Issei-kun? Issei blinked twice as he looked at the Mayu cluelessly, voicing his sentiment in the most intelligent manner he could muster. Huh? You seemed disturbed for a few moments after I told you about the new contract I had in mind. Surziches said calmly, inwardly intrigued as to what could have caused such a reaction from the brunette. Oh. Issei mumbled dumbly, before he regained his lost composure and told the Mayu what he was thinking in a calm tone. Well, I kinda wanted to participate in the raiding games under Riaz, but you said it's impossible to, since I'm not a devil, and it frustrated me. He responded honestly. Surziches pointedly ignored his sister's hope-lit eyes, knowing that he would give in immediately and that he would have to face a shitstorm he didn't want when he would get back in the underworld. If and only if the elders from the High Devil Council and my colleagues approve of you, will you be able to participate in a raiding game, Issei-kun? Unfortunately, that's all I can offer you on that front. He said firmly, more to his sister, who he was sure that pouted adorably at him, than the person he addressed. The Kenno's infamously amused UFU giggle all but confirmed the Mayu's assumption about his sister's reaction. To his credit, Surziches held himself back from reacting on impulse and teasing his little sister. Even though he didn't like it, Issei chose to be inwardly optimistic that the devils would accept him so that he could participate in raiding games in the future. With a light sigh of defeated acceptance and a small smile, the Seker said the long-awaited words. I accept. Wonderful. Surziches withheld a largely satisfied grin behind his charming smile. The two pointedly ignored the excited devils around them, the brunette more so than the Mayu. I'll run this by Sona as well, so that she knows about the change in the contract. Surziches added as an afterthought. An epiphany of sorts hit the brunette. He could be Sona's contracted magician as well, even if the status of their relationship wasn't the best currently. So, as he spoke, he thought that this was his way to make a step towards the betterment of his relationship with the student council president. Then, tell her that I'm interested in making the same deal with her, minus the raiding game part. The brunette's words came as a shock to the members of the Orc, who knew about his current relationship with the Citri heiress. So much so, that they were left speechless. Surziches, while perplexed, was pleasantly surprised at the development. Sure, Issei-kun. He assured with his charming smile. When the two exchanged acknowledging nods that their conversation was done for the time being, the Mayu stood up from his chair and looked at the still visibly shocked young devils in the room. Then, without saying another word, he left the clubroom through the doors, leaving the Seker to deal with the aftermath, sure that the powerful team could handle it. Issei, for his part, closed his eyes and leaned his head on the couch's back, with his hands making a makeshift pillow under it. He also had a small, almost imperceptible, satisfied smile that this unexpected meeting went better than he had anticipated at the start. all the while pointedly ignoring everyone else's dumbfounded expressions. And pointedly ignoring, again, Zangetsu's suggestion to stick his dick in the mouth of every female in the room, since their mouths were gaping open. And all was right in the world. 2 hours passed by relatively quickly for everyone in the orc. Surziches had been gone within 30 minutes from when he went to Sona's office. Speaking of, she agreed to form a contract with the Red Dragon Emperor. Similar to the new one he made with Ria's, but without the possibility of assisting her in raiding games. Not that Sona was privy to this bit about Ria's and Issei's contract. But, considering her personality, no one doubted that the SCP would still reject such a possibility, mostly because she was too prideful for something like that, not to mention that her ultimate goal didn't necessarily need such a powerful individual like Issei. As nothing more than an allied figure, that is, which was the reason she made the contract in the first place. Well, even if asked, Sona wouldn't exactly verify that she also made the contract out of her obvious interest in the Haidu young man, but wouldn't outright deny it either. Call her whatever you want, but the Citri heiress didn't want her overbearing older sister, who's also a Mayu, to reach unwanted conclusions and cause any kind of scene at the Sekiryute's expense. Anyhow, the devils and powerful humans had been left alone by the Mayu's unexpected visit. Everyone took their time to do their homework and, in Ria's and Sona's cases, paperwork. Back at the Orc, the members just finished with their tasks and the Redeed servants were waiting for the green light from their master, or is it mistress, to start working on their contracts. Everyone. Ria's called out calmly with a matching smile on her lips, gaining the rest of the occupants' attention. You can do whatever you want for the rest of the day. Curiously enough, none of us have a contract today. She announced in the same fashion. Perfect. Issei thought to himself victoriously, hiding his eagerness behind a mask of calmness. Then, how about we go outside and train? He suggested airily. This gave even Ria's a pause, because she knew it in her gut that something was up. The rest just perked up a bit. That's not really a bad idea. Yudo nodded in agreement. Count me in, Ice-kun. Issei nodded back in acknowledgement. I want to train with Isen as well. Was Asia's somewhat embarrassed yet enthusiastic reply. Me too. Kaneko nodded expressionlessly, but everyone could notice the eagerness and determination in her eyes. Raufufu Akeno giggled, pleasantly surprised by the motivation of her juniors. If my Kouheis are so motivated, then it would be a disgrace for me as your senpai to not join you. Yes. Ria's easily agreed with a pleasant smile of her own as she stood up from her chair, prompting the rest to do the same. As the president of this club, it wouldn't do well for me to be absent from such an endeavor. Especially since you all seem so eager to train. Even as she announced her agreement in an elegant way, she dismissed a feeling from earlier, while also missing the glint in the brunette boy's eyes. Yet, without further ado, the devils followed the sole human outside and at the back of the old school building. It was obvious that they all agreed to the fact that he was the strongest of the group, without even saying it out loud. Also, it was silently agreed that the brunette would be the one to supervise their training, considering their experience on the matter from the 8 days they all had spent together before the raiding game against Razor. Alright. Issei said calmly as he eyed the patiently waiting devils. First of all, we'll all wear the magical weights. Then, we'll do some light exercises to get our bodies warm and ready for action. His order met no resistance, since everyone had become accustomed to train with the weights, no matter how strenuous it was. A few moments later, everyone had the magical weights on and activated. There was only mild discomfort on everybody's faces, but otherwise they made no complaints. This included Asia and Ria's. Without saying anything, Issei started a light jog around the small clearing, with the rest following his lead. 3 laps later, he stopped and made a show of light stretching, which the devils imitated. Once that was done as well, Issei signaled them to stand upright for his next instructions. Now you'll spar in pairs. First go Kaneko-san and Yudo-kun, then Akeno-san and Ria's. Me and Asia-chan will work on activating and maintaining the barriers around you, with Asia-chan healing you if it's necessary. His words were met with understanding nods, and everyone got into position, with the expressionless Rook and perpetually smiling Knight taking the center of the clearing. Akeno and Ria stood at the edge with the Sekiryute and the Italian girl, while the latter duo created a barrier around the clearing. The peerage's queen gave her instructions on how to make it more stable and maintain it, which Issei and Asia followed to the letter, since the Ravenet was more experienced than them at magical barriers. Irideed signaled to her Rook and Knight to start their spar, while she and Akeno watched attentively through the transparent blue barrier. It was obvious that both combatants were heavily holding back, since they didn't want to greatly injure one another. That said, it was also obvious that both had improved greatly since the 8 days in the underworld. Especially in fighting dirty. More so in Kaneko's case than Yudo's. After all, as a rook, Kaneko was the slowest peerage member with fighting prowess, so she had to make do with whatever she could do to even the odds against faster opponents and, possibly potentially, slightly stronger ones. In the end, the spar ended in a draw. Yudo had his sword against Kaneko's neck, while the smaller girl's left leg was almost touching the knight's family jewels. Akeno couldn't stop the ufu giggle that escaped her lips at the sight, while Riaz shook her head in amusement. Yudo, for his part, chuckled awkwardly with a sweat drop at the back of his head as he retracted his sword, with Kaneko lowering her leg at the same time, inwardly grateful that she hadn't finished that move. Good work you two. Riaz praised her servants with a motherly smile on her lips, showing how proud she was with their progress. Thank you, Riaz Butchu. Yudo said gratefully with a small bow of his head. Thanks. Kaneko said monotonously, but her eyes showed how she enjoyed the praise. On a side note, nobody, not even Issei and especially not Riaz, knew how much it meant to Kaneko that she was able to improve herself so much. She didn't want to be a burden to her king. And, most importantly, she didn't want to feel useless. Momentarily, the barrier went down, in order for Asia to heal the two sparring partners. Really small cuts and bruises were on their bodies here and there, but the ex-nun made them vanish in mere seconds with her twilight healing. Just as the two powerhouses of the peerage went to the center of the clearing, smirking competitively to each other, Issei drew everyone's attention with a clap of his hands. It was at that moment that everybody took notice of the glint in his eyes and the predatory smirk he wore. It caused Akeno and Riaz to feel shivers running down their spines, each for entirely different reasons. The queen knew that whatever was coming next would be simply delightful, while the feeling of foreboding for the king returned with a vengeance. Considering what happened right before my fight with Razor, Issei started in an eerily calm tone that had both girls in the center of the clearing shiver even more. I decided to make this spar even more of a challenge for Riaz. He announced in the same tone. Why is that, Ice? Riaz asked a little shakily, trying to mask her bewilderment behind a mask of pure confusion. Nobody bought her act. Especially not Akeno and Issei. I don't care if it sounds arrogant or not, but, truth be told, if you had faced Razor on your own, with Asia as your only backup, it would surely lead up to your defeat, no matter if it would be humiliating or not. On top of that, you tried to face him behind our backs. I won't go into detail how your actions would have caused trust issues and how everybody felt at that moment, because your match against Akeno-san will remedy your mistake. The brunette explained in the same eerily calm tone. Iridide couldn't find words to argue against him, because she knew he was right. She could have done without him scolding her like a child, though, but she knew better than to act on her own stubbornness. Fine. She begrudgingly accepted with a clearly nervous gulp. At her acceptance, Issei's predatory smirk turned to a grin, which seemed a little terrifying in Ria's eyes. Good girl. In spite of his facial expression, his tone remained the same once again. The king's cheeks heated up a little involuntarily in a rosy pink hue, but remained silent, knowing that whatever he had in store for her wasn't going to be pretty. Especially since a notorious sadist like her queen was directly involved. That thought caused her to realize why the Sekiryuite and the Ravenet had so much synergy with each other, considering that Akeno was as much of a masochist as she was a sadist. And Riaz wanted to believe that she was neither, but she was pretty sure that her contracted magician and queen were going to imprint in her mind that she was a masochist at heart. Maybe she was, because her nether regions became a little hot and bothered at the thought. So, Issei's still eerily calm voice drew the redeed out of her a little confusing musings. Akeno-san will hold nothing back as she attacks. Neither with her magic, nor with her evil peace traits, namely her speed, physical strength and enhanced magical abilities as the queen. On the other hand, Riaz will be blindfolded and only try to dodge. Not defend or counterattack. Akeno looked positively ecstatic at his orders, a red blush covering her cheeks at the thoughts of how she could discipline her king, while Riaz looked paler than a ghost, her previous thoughts being confirmed even more, and her mild arousal all but instantly forgotten. Udo's perpetually charming smile turned awkward, Kaneko's expressionless face looked at the brunette with a deadpan, and Asia looked increasingly worried. The knight and rook tried to subtly get away, but Issei's next words froze them on the spot. Also, everyone here will watch till the very end. Kaneko and Yudo audibly gulped at his slightly stern tone, knowing that it was directed at them, even though the Sekiryuite didn't even look their way. Akeno's blushing face and smile made Riaz want to cry as it was the last thing she saw before her queen magically produced a purple ribbon, which she used to blindfold the Gremory heiress. Interestingly enough, even though Asia was usually against any kind of violence, this time she didn't say anything to prevent it. Riaz took this as a silent message that her bishop actually agreed fully with her contracted magician. And, so, she knew she had lost her last resort, so as to lessen what she now knew as her punishment. Asia is the only person here allowed to close her eyes. Her concentration on the barrier is more important than the spar, after all. Issei finished airily. Again, poor Riaz wanted to cry as she felt the transparent barrier come back to life, essentially trapped her inside it with her queen. However, if it meant that she could earn her contracted magician's favor again, the redeeted king determined herself to go through her punishment with her head held high, knowing that she wouldn't be able to predict much of her strong queen's attacks, if none at all. Without her sight, Riaz was basically a sitting duck for Akeno's attacks. And it proved as much throughout the 10-minute spar. Yet, the humiliating defeat Riaz suffered at the hands of Akeno caused the redeed more arousal than she would have liked to admit. Especially since she was spanked quite a bit in front of an audience. And her clothes were so heavily tattered that only the essentials were covered. Riaz was in as much pain from her injuries as she was aroused by the way Akeno had manhandled her, and she had lost count on how many times she had climaxed in the short time the spar lasted. So much for not being a masochist. Akeno, on the other hand, even though she got off very much from her king's screams and hidden arousal, had not, in fact, climaxed. Not even once. Sadomasochist she may be, but she only wanted to be seen in such a state by only those she wanted. In this case, by her king and the person that allowed her to have unrestricted fun with her hidden fantasies. In the end, both girls wanted to have a good talk with the Sekiruyute at some point. Probably after another necessary conversation that had been suggested a few days before. On a side note, Yudo and Kaneko left for their home as soon as the spar ended with visible blushes on their cheeks, both at the sight of their king's state of undress and the sounds both king and queen made. Poor Asia's head was at the brink of explosion from the sheer heat it had accumulated due to what she had heard happening in the spar, but the girl didn't run away like the other two. After all, Riaz was still an injured person that needed her attention, which the Italian girl was more than glad if a bit embarrassed to give. As for Issei, the brunette would have been more than hot and bothered by the display of Akeno and Riaz if he didn't have the sense to focus on the spar rather than the arousing sight throughout it. That was totally embarrassing, Issei sighed mentally as he watched Asia healing Riaz while Akeno helped in the process. What do you mean? Zangetsu asked obliviously. It's obvious that Red got off on her punishment. Even more than the S&M queen. Not talking about that. Issei denied casually before he explained in a clinical fashion. The blindfold was just a spur-of-the-moment thing, but it proved something. The devils rely too much on their sight and can't do anything without it. In the future, this could prove to be fatal if, say, FabvL attacked them out of nowhere. I see what you mean, partner. As usual, Drake focused on the important parts. Us dragons rely on hearing and sense as much as our sight. All beings have basic instincts as to what they should do or avoid, but none more so than dragons. Exactly. Issei agreed. Basic survival instincts won't cut it for somebody like FabvL or Azazel, or even Vali. I know I can handle them just fine, but Riaz and her peerage would basically be sitting ducks against them if they can't sense them. In another way. He sighed dejectedly, realizing that he would have to train everybody in that aspect. Their conversation was put on hold as the girls got up and Riaz magically produced another academy uniform on her person. They noticed a brunette waiting for them with a serious demeanor and his arms crossed against his chest, so they knew that his mind was nowhere near the arousing one-sided fight. What's on your mind, Ice-kun? Akeno asked him kindly with a matching smile, having come down from her high sometime during helping with Ria's healing. Asia and Riaz were too tired to say anything, but paid close attention. Nothing too significant. Issei assured them with a small shake of his head, but his demeanor didn't change. Your spar may have been for Ria's punishment, he ignored the redeed subtle wince for the reminder as he continued. But it came to my attention that all of you need more training. And I don't mean like the one in the underworld. He said calmly, albeit seriously. All three girls blinked in confusion at his words. I'll explain and demonstrate what I mean tomorrow if it's as slow in terms of devil contracts as today. He clarified. It's getting late and all of us need some rest. Especially Asia-chan and Riaz. He added as an afterthought. The girls nodded and Akeno helped Riaz towards the clubroom while Issei and Asia took their leave towards their shared home. And, on the way there, the Sekiruyute thought about bringing Rainer to the training session the next day as well. Should it happen, of course. After all, now that he was basically free, he didn't care what Riaz and Akeno thought about the female fallen angel and what issues the queen may have. He would force them to accept her in the circle if he had to, because Rainer was the one to protect his parents in his absence. Before that, though, Issei needed some rest. Not because of physical or mental exhaustion, but because he needed as much of a clear mind as he could have for what he planned to do the next day. Both for the training session and, interestingly enough, his classroom as well. There had been a long due apology he should have given a while ago. And tomorrow was as good a day as any to do so. The spar between Issei and his soul tenants came to a close since it was time for the brunette to wake up and start his day. The trio exchanged no words, but it was obvious that Zangetsu and Drake were amused about something that had to do with their host, whom they purposefully left in the dark as to why they showed such a sentiment. It didn't take long for Issei to understand the reason behind their amusement, though. As soon as he woke up, he resisted the urge to yell in surprise, as well as suppress a boner from forming at his crotch. Somehow, during the night and obviously when he was occupied by the dragon in his sacred gear and the sword spirit in his inner world, 3 more bodies were added in his small bed. More specifically, a completely nude Ria's Gremory was sleeping peacefully with a matching smile on her lips on his right, with his arm being trapped between the devilish valley of her gorgeous breasts. Similarly, on his left, the same thing was happening to his other arm with Rainer as the perpetrator. The difference between the raven-haired beauty and the crimson-haired one, however, was that the former was wearing a slightly see-through nightgown in the color of black. Underneath it, she wore a sexy set of equally black brassiere and a thong to cover her modesty. Yet, somehow, Rainer was on the same level of sexiness as the nude Reed. Idly, he silently wondered what would happen if Akeno had joined them in this endeavor. Wrong move, because it almost caused him to have a boner in an instant, knowing her nature as a teasing personality. So, he forcefully put the thought where it came from. The last person wasn't exactly on the bed, per se. After all, Asia used his chest as a pillow and the rest of his body as a mattress, her delicate hands hugging him and intertwining behind his abdomen. She wore a yellow nightgown with white floral patterns, underneath which she sported her white undergarments. Both Asia and Rainer mimicked Ria's peaceful expression and matching smile, as all 3 used him as a personal heater and body pillow. Even though it's a bit late, the brunette realized that he could see all these details clearly because there wasn't a sheet covering them. He couldn't stop a scowl on his face when he heard Zangetsu's uproarious laughter in his head, but didn't comment on it as he tried to focus on how to get out of their grasp without alerting them of his movements. Unfortunately, he didn't get to finish his thought process, as Rainer chose to wake up at that moment. Huwaaa, she yawned cutely, still sleepy as she sat up a little and stretched her body. While this small process did delightful things to her scantily clad breasts, it also freed Issei's left arm. She let out satisfied moans that sounded way too arousing in the brunette's ears when she heard and felt the pops on her limbs. Turning her head slightly to look at him, she smiled sweetly as she whispered, "Good morning, Ice-kun." "Good morning, Ray-chan." Issei whispered back with a slightly defeated tone, finishing with a matching sigh. Curious, Rainer looked at the rest of the bed, her waking mind instantly recognizing the reason behind his demeanor. She silently giggled behind her delicate right hand in amusement before she looked at him with a mischievous expression. His eyes widened slightly in surprise when she leaned down and sweetly pecked him on his left cheek. Yet, when she ascended back to her sitting position and continued to look at him with the same mischievousness as before. He felt a little bit disappointed that it didn't last longer. That said, it didn't mean he couldn't return the favor. "Come here, I want to tell you something," he whispered in an almost inaudible voice. Rainer leaned towards his face with her head turned slightly, so she missed the sudden glint in his eyes. So, she was totally caught off guard when he pecked her right cheek in the same way she had done to him a few seconds ago. She almost squealed in surprise, but showed her sentiment by jumping off the bed and looking at him in shock, her entire face and neck covered in a feverish red blush. Her right hand snapped towards where her rapidly beating heart was, while her left clamped her mouth shut, since she was conscious enough to not wake up the rest of the house's residents with her screaming. His triumphant smirk made her want to beat him up for his teasing, as well as happy that he finally reciprocated the gesture. The fallen girl gave him a look that clearly said this isn't over and quietly got out of his room, inadvertently giving him quite the view of her backside. Issei wanted to celebrate this small victory, but he was unable to due to the other 2 occupants on his bed that essentially trapped his body with no way of escape. So, he settled for sighing quietly in resignation, hoping that the 2 girls would wake up soon. It was another lively morning in the Haidu household, with Akane wondering why Rainer was almost glowing from giddiness. Her answer came when the female fallen angel told in front of everyone that she and the youngest Haidu shared a good morning kiss, even if it was on the cheeks. And, while Akane and Goru were visibly ecstatic about this admittedly small development, Asia and Riaz gave the Sekirute pouty, clearly jealous glares. The former of the 2 younger girls' look was completed with unshed tears in the corner of her eyes and an adorable rosy blush on her cheeks. That said, Riaz was also adorable, simply because she was pouting. Issei chose to ignore the craziness for the sake of his almost non-existent sanity. The brunette was fortunate that it was a school day, so the girls would have a solid distraction for the rest of the day. Speaking of, we have to go. Issei stood up from the table, gaining the attention of everyone else. Riaz took a moment to look at the time and, true to the brunette's words, it was time to go to school with very little time to spare. So, with a nod to the blonde Italian girl, she mimicked Issei's actions and got ready to leave. Before that, however, thank you for your hospitality, hi to Akane-san, hi to Goru-san. The Redeed bowed and said in elegant politeness with a matching smile on her lips. It was a pleasure, Riaz-chan. Akane bowed back, albeit without being formal in her words. Goru mimicked his wife. You can come and stay anytime you want, Riaz-chan. Me and my dear wife will be happy to have you. And I'm sure our son and the girls won't mind as well. He exclaimed with a wide grin. The Gremory heiress withheld a triumphant grin at the permission to come whenever she desired. That way, she could get closer to the one she wanted. Her inner happiness must have shown on her expression because the parents' grins widened a fraction. I don't mind. Asia's shy, yet giddy declaration almost caught the three of them off guard. To their inner embarrassment, they had almost forgotten that the ex-nun and the female fallen angel were in the room. I don't mind either. Rainer said disinterestedly as she washed the dishes. As long as I can have my fill of ice-kun, I don't care even if an entire army of girls flock around him. Her serious statement caused Asia and Riaz to have atomic blushes from the implication, while Akane and Goru wore dreamy expressions at the thought of so many daughters-in-law and subsequent grandbabies to spoil. I would appreciate it if all of you left my personal affairs for me to decide. Issei's clearly irritated voice broke the spell, making them almost jump in surprise at his sudden re-entrance. He broke the awkward silence with a resigned sigh and made his way to the door. Asia and Riaz broke out of their trance and, in a couple of seconds, they were by his sides, ready for school as well. The brunette opened the door for the girls to go out first and paused when he was about to exit as well. Ray-chan. He called over his shoulder. Why yes. She called back, clearly embarrassed that he heard her previous admission. Come to school at about 5 in the afternoon. With his piece said, the brunette closed the door behind him, not waiting for any kind of reply. Why did you tell her to come after the school day ends, Ice? Riaz asked him curiously, the earlier events already stored in the back of her mind. The trio were walking in a relaxed fashion, knowing that they would reach Kuo Academy on time, without Sona reprimanding them for being late. Well, Issei hummed to gather his words properly. Truth is, yesterday I noticed something that you completely lacked during your punishment. And, knowing that you're stronger than your peerage in some aspects, I think that they lack the same thing as well. Probably Sona-san and her peerage too. It goes without saying that Rainer is included too, which is why I told her to come. He said seriously, not looking at her as he was focused on their road. The two girls were caught off guard by his words, with Riaz choosing to ignore the word he used to describe her humiliation at Akeno's hands. What was it, Ai-san? Asia asked, equally curious with the Redeed on his other side. Instinct. His almost flat response almost caused the girls to stumble on their feet in surprise. They gazed at him expectantly, but it didn't seem like he would clarify what he meant anytime soon. What do you mean, Ice? Riaz forced herself to sound curious and not frustrated. I'll explain everything this afternoon. The brunette said calmly, before turning his head slightly to look at the Redeed from the corner of his eye. So, do me a favor and tell Sona-san to meet up with us at the gym, along with her peerage. He added in the same tone. Okay. Riaz nodded her consent. Will we need anything else? She asked curiously. A couple of black ribbons to act as blindfolds will do. He replied casually, returning his attention to his front. Riaz suppressed a shiver at the reminder of the reason why she couldn't react to Akeno's relentless assault last night. Asia was slightly confused. Ai-san. Issei hummed in question at Asia's call. Will I be included in the training you're talking about? She asked curiously, inwardly hoping that he said no. Truthfully, you should. Issei said gently as he looked at her from the corner of his eye. At her confused expression, he elaborated. As a healer and a non-combatant, there's a high chance that you're going to be continuously targeted in future raiding games. With my training, we'll try to reduce the probability of success to a bare minimum. Is it going to be harsh? Riaz couldn't help but ask, hiding her trepidation behind a mask of curiosity. Issei hummed and thought at that for a few seconds before he answered honestly. Probably. In reality, it all depends on how easy or hard it is for all of you to get what I'll try to teach you. While his answer wasn't all that reassuring, Riaz and Asia chose to be optimistic and think that whatever he had in store for them and the others wouldn't be all that harsh. Lunch break came quickly in Kuo Academy, and Issei found himself under a shade of a tree behind the kendo club, having his meal in peaceful silence. The brunette teen's oversensitive ears picked up that Riaz passed his message to Sona, along with the fact that Rainer would join them. The SCP agreed to meet up with them, albeit reluctantly, since she and her peerage had their South Carolina duties to attend to. Curiously enough, Akeno didn't voice any objection. This time. With everything going smoothly so far, the brunette decided to have a conversation with the two tenants occupying his mind and soul. So, what do you guys think about the training I plan to do for the Devils and Ray-chan? Issei mentally asked in genuine curiosity. We've been over this already, partner Drake sighed in exasperation. Doesn't hurt to talk about it one more time. Zangetsu dismissed the dragon's sentiment, albeit in a surprisingly gentle manner. Alright. Essentially, you're gonna try to teach them your sense in hockey. He summarized aptly. The brunette nodded in agreement. Although, it'll be a weaker version of my own. I just want them to feel their surroundings and up their fighting instincts. Don't make them like me. He explained casually. Honestly, I'm not sure it's gonna work on them. Surprisingly, it was Drake that almost objected the idea. Why's that? Issei couldn't help but ask, more than a little curious. Now that I think about it, maybe the lizard's right. Zangetsu reluctantly agreed with the seal dragon, making the brunette even more curious. As if sensing that, Drake spoke seriously in a lecturing tone. Partner, you've got to consider what you want to teach the devils, and that fallen girl is an otherworldly power. One that you're the only known user of. Not to mention the other ones. The best you're gonna accomplish is to completely and utterly confuse them with the concept. What if he took the training from their perspective, though? Zangetsu interjected with a seemingly valid question. King is a human, while they're not. Or, some of them aren't anymore. You guys have a point. Issei hummed in agreement with both his tenants. Since they're not human, one way or another, there's little chance that it'll work the same with me, if at all. Glad that your brain didn't fry from today's morning. Drake deadpanned at his host. Ignoring the latter's sudden sputtering at the jab, he continued in his previously serious tone. The best you can do is what you originally intended. Kickstart their fighting instincts. In this world, all supernatural species have them. It's up to those species to hone their instincts and abilities to their best and survive against stronger foes or even numerous and weaker ones. Issei held back the comment about the dragon speaking from experience. After all, it was widely known that both heavenly dragons lost to the combined might of the three Christian factions, even though they both were included in the top 10 strongest beings in the universe. Then, how should I go about it? The brunette asked curiously after the small pause in the conversation, showing that he had understood them. It's as you told Red this morning, King. Zangetsu said nonchalantly, giving the impression that he shrugged his shoulders in the same manner. You'll explain to them in the afternoon. They may be rookies for the most part, but they're still supernatural species. They have their own instincts and, as the lizard said, the best you can do is kickstart them. Don't forget that the Citri girl is going to be with them. Drake reminded them suddenly. Good point. Issei almost cheered at the reminder. Sona-sen is the most intelligent person out of all the devils here. She's gonna be of great help to this whole thing. Satisfied that his conversation bore some fruit, Issei cleaned up and got ready to go back to class. King. Zangetsu spoke up suddenly, making the brunette pause mid-step. After a hum of acknowledgement, the sword spirit spoke again. If you want to listen to me, don't do the other thing you have in mind, he said seriously. Why? Issei couldn't help but ask with a frown on his face. Because there's no reason to. Drake interjected coldly, almost making his host flinch from his tone. None of these humans deserve your apology. None of them were close to you in some way or another. Just because you defeated the reincarnated knight in such a way, these humans became totally afraid of you. If this much is what it takes for people to have an opinion of you, then they don't deserve your attention, much less your apology. Plus Zangetsu added in the same coldness as his roommate before their wielder could say anything. Most of them are hypocrites. Mostly the girls. If they want you in their lives, they should be the ones to apologize for having such a reaction. You've done nothing wrong. Issei sighed heavily in emotions that he couldn't describe as he restarted his walk towards his class. Like always, his tenants were right in everything they said. Most, if not all, of the girls in school were as much of perverts as Mitsuda and Motohama, but they seemed to hold their perversion to themselves. For the most part. After all, when he and Yudo were close to one another, talking like the friends they were, the girls started some unsavory yaoi rumors between the two of them, sometimes including Kaden and Murayama, who all but ran a crusade against M&M by beating them to a pulp with every chance they got. Especially Kiryu Aika. That girl was worse than M&M combined, but got away with her perversion just because she was a girl and sometimes kept in line with the aforementioned perverts. The only people that he thought weren't perverts were Yudo, Kaneko and Asia. Probably Sona too, but that had yet to be determined. The same with the other members of the South Carolina. You're right, Issei whispered with a defeated sigh as he closed into his class. They're not worth it. His current belief strengthened when he entered the classroom and, aside from Asia who smiled kindly at him and waved shyly in greeting, everyone else didn't even dare to make eye contact with him as he made his way to his designated seat, responding to the ex-nun in kind as he passed by her. With his mind somewhat clean, Issei focused on what the teachers taught, inwardly anticipating this afternoon a little more eagerly. School and club activities ended half an hour ago, and the majority of the student body returned to their homes. However, the student council, the occult research club and the recently added Rainer, who wore a set of black tracksuit, a black short-sleeved t-shirt over a black sports bra and black sneakers, were at the gym. On a side note, all the devils mimicked Rainer's attire, albeit with the academy's tracksuits. Of course, Issei wasn't exempt from this. Speaking of the Securitate, he was standing in front of the rest with his arms crossed against his chest, facing them with a serious gaze, making most of them uncomfortable. Well, that is, mostly Sona's group of devils, aside from the king herself and her queen. Alright. Now that you're all here, I'm gonna explain what all of you are going to train on for the foreseeable future. Issei announced suddenly, his serious voice making the supernatural girls and boys stand up a bit straighter. After a moment, he continued. Yesterday, I noticed something that, unless trained properly, it's gonna be a serious problem in the future for all of you. His words made them confused. Riaz and Asia were the only ones that knew more or less what he was talking about. Sona opened her mouth to ask, but Issei spoke again, cutting her off. Instead of outright explaining, I'll show you first. Explanation later. The Securitate said firmly, before he locked eyes with his contractor of a devil. Riaz, have you brought the ribbons like I told you this morning? Even if it sounded like a question, it was more of a polite attempt to demand something than anything else. Iridid nodded and took out a pair of black ribbons from her pocket, showing them to their trainer. Good. Issei nodded in satisfaction before he addressed his swordsman friend. Yudo-kun, take the ribbons and come here. He all but ordered. The perpetually smiling knight did as told. Then, Issei took one of the ribbons and promptly used it as a blindfold on himself, motioning to his friend to put the other one away for the time being. Tiba immediately gained an idea as to what this training would be about and felt himself tremble in a combination of anticipation and trepidation. The latter because of the duo's public spar a little while ago. The people that had been present at the aforementioned event widened their eyes slightly in surprise, getting an idea as to what they would be trained in as well. Now, Yudo-kun, you're gonna attack me with everything you have. However, you'll keep your speed at a human's level so that everyone can see what I want to demonstrate. Issei instructed in a lecturing tone. For the first minute, I'll just be on the defensive. Afterwards, for another minute, I'll counterattack as well, but just enough to tire you out, not outright hurt you. He added in the same tone. That's reassuring Yudo and the devils that had seen what Issei was capable of thought to themselves with a tiny bit of sarcasm. Using his sacred gear, Yudo produced a sword. Not even a second later, he started attacking his friend with it. As instructed, he didn't hold anything back. For the next minute, everyone watched in mostly fascination and a bit of frustration in Yudo's case, as an essentially blind Issei just avoided being cut with the minimum amount of movements, sidestepping, leaning backwards or to either side, ducking and/or lightly jumping over Kiba's sword. Abruptly, just as the minute he had promised ended, Issei started blocking the sword by its flat side with his palms and used his feet to lightly kick Yudo on the ribs or his feet to stop his momentum. At first, the reincarnated devil was caught off guard but quickly adapted in the spar's change of pace. Then, just as suddenly the spar started, Issei caught Yudo's blade in between his palms and connected his right leg on the knight's left ribs with no power behind his kick. And stop. Issei announced firmly. Hiba and the rest blinked in surprise, with everyone but the knight feeling a little disappointed that this demonstration ended so quickly. Mostly because the blindfolded teen didn't emit a scary feeling throughout it. The brunette took a moment to return to his previous position and take off the ribbon from his eyes. While this happened, Yudo dismissed his sword and, like everyone else, looked at Issei expectantly for an explanation. That is, after the knight returned to his king's side. The Securitate took a slow breath in to gather his thoughts and words properly, before letting it out just as slowly. Then, he faced the group with a serious expression, his hands, this time, in his pockets, instead of crossing them against his chest. Greg told me that all supernatural species, including the dragons, have instincts. Issei started his explanation with a vague statement, albeit one that everyone before him knew about. Basic instincts, like devils knowing when an angel or a fallen is before them and vice versa. Survival instincts kick in when one knows that their opponent is stronger than them and tries to flee before their dead meat. There are several others, but we're only going to focus on one aspect that probably none of you know about and most certainly have never trained in. He paused for a moment and took in their confused expressions as they looked at one another in uncertainty. It's called battle instincts. Issei announced seriously and took his hands out of his pockets as he gained their attention once more. Though, this time, most of the devils and Rainer had an expression of epiphany on their faces. As you all know, I'm just an empowered human. Not a devil, fallen, angel, or anything else. You all saw what I did in the spar against Yudo-kun. While I do have a power that allows me to detect an attack and avoid it easily without even looking, I can do the same thing with just my instincts. He explained in the same tone. This time, Sona got to speak. How so, Haidu-kun? She asked critically with a slightly narrowed gaze behind her glasses. It was a question that all of the others had as well. That, and the two kings filed a question about the power he just mentioned since it took their interest, which was the reason for Sona's narrowed eyes. From my understanding, supernatural species have enhanced senses. Some more than others, but the point still stands. At everyone's nod of confirmation, he continued his analysis. Aside from experienced fighters, everyone relies mostly on their sight and forget about their ears until it's too late. I've seen it firsthand with the orc, but it just became apparent yesterday. I've even seen it in movies, but I don't want to go there. So you say that, by using just our hearing, we'll become better fighters? Rainer asked skeptically with a slight tilt of her head to the left. Her sentiment was shared by almost everyone there. Only Kiba and Kaneko looked even more interested than before. Although, with the small girl's perpetually expressionless facade it was difficult to detect unless one could read her eyes. Something like that. Issei nodded in confirmation before he explained the concept he was talking about thoroughly in a serious manner as he crossed his arms against his chest. Ridding you of your sight will make all of your other senses go haywire. Especially hearing. Once you focus on it, you'll detect the smallest of sounds in a close proximity. By training it, you'll be able to detect sounds from farther distances. In essence, you'll be aware of your surroundings and your potential enemies and/or opponents will be none the wiser. Instead of you being ambushed, you're gonna be the one to ambush them. What makes this better, though, is that it kickstarts your survival instincts. In case someone attacks you from afar, your body will react and avoid said attack even before your brain sends the order to do so. All this sounds interesting, Ice-kun. Akeno said thoughtfully with a finger on her chin to indicate she was still processing everything she heard. You make it sound and seem easy, what with your earlier demonstration, but I believe that I speak for all of us here that I doubt that's the case. Very true. Issei admitted shamelessly with a nod of his head, making most devils grimace. Unless, of course, you're just a human and not a supernatural entity, while also being unwilling to hone your abilities and solely rely on your talents. He pointed out with a hint of sarcasm. Are you saying that supernatural species have a higher chance to improve due to our origins? Rias questioned in a pondering manner, inwardly screaming in frustration at her instructors and brother for not saying anything of this nature to her earlier. Sona shared the Redeed sentiments and did the same thing in her mind, albeit mostly towards her sister, who spent more time glumping her than actually teaching her something worthwhile. Yes. Issei replied simply. Every single one of you excel in something. Power, support, speed, magic or anything else in between. Some of you are good in more than one aspect. However, if someone stronger than you appears before you and you haven't put in an effort to train in anything to make yourselves better in some way or other, you're gonna lose in a horrible fashion. He added nonchalantly. Apart from Rainer and Asia, everyone else looked at the now scowling Kiba at the reminder of their infamous spar. It was just a simple example, but not one that most of them wanted to even remember, regardless of the outcome afterwards. Also, Rias and Akeno thought of their own spar the day before, which was the most recent example of what Issei was talking about and couldn't help but agree with his assessment. Then again, Akeno wasn't stronger than Rias per se, what with Iridit being the king. But when the latter was robbed of her sight, she might as well have been a helpless human against the former's assault. So, Issei broke the contemplative silence that had befallen the gym with a serious tone. I'm gonna train you in your battle instincts. Once all of you start showing some level of improvement, I'll tell you to start honing it on your own. Everyone there nodded in understanding. Rias, Sona, Tsubaki, Kaneko, Akeno and Rainer were already thinking of potential ways and partners to better themselves in the aspect he just mentioned, with Kiba being the only one contemplating asking his friend to help him afterwards as well. Asia didn't even ask why she was included in this training. Naive and innocent as she was, the ex-nun was smart enough to know that such an ability would be quite useful for a non-combatant support character like herself. She didn't like hurting anyone, nor others getting hurt just to protect her. So, she was determined to start the training and, then, get help from everyone else in the peerage and even Issei. On a side note, all the devils were aware that this ability was going to be useful in the future, since both Rias and Sona were bound to participate in raiding games at some point. Just then, Sona's mind caught up to a detail that the rest simply didn't have the intellect to detect. While, yes, the ability was useful, and the Sekiryu mentioned that he noticed the lack of such skill just the day before, in her mind, it seemed that the brunette was adamant to start as soon as possible. Haidu-kun. She called out in her usual strict tone, breaking the silence and drawing the attention of her person. At his acknowledging him as he faced her with a raised eyebrow, she spoke. Why do you seem like you want all of us to start training immediately? she basically demanded. Issei and the others were surprised by the sudden question, with the former managing to hide it completely, although it reminded him that Sona matched him in intellect. As for everyone else, they looked at him expectantly for an answer. That said, he couldn't outright tell them that a cadre-class fallen angel had his sights on Kuo. Or, more specifically, the two heiresses, Riaz and Sona. Nor the fact that he knew such a thing from the Governor-General of the Grigori, Azazel himself. Sona's gaze narrowed in suspicion as the brunete's silence proved that he wanted to train them for a purpose that everyone was out of the loop, while the others just became a little wary. On a final note, Issei hated lying. However, that didn't mean he would tell them the truth either, since it would cause all kinds of trouble. "I can't tell you, Sona-san," he said seriously, much to the shock of almost everyone there that there was indeed a hidden reason behind their imminent training. "Just know that it's for your own good, and I have the best intentions as Riaz and your contracted magician." Suddenly, there was tension in the air as Sona was joined by almost everyone there glaring at him in a mixture of anger and frustration for his answer. Understandable, since, as he pointed out, Issei was the two heiresses' contracted magician. So, in that sense, he should trust them with the true answer. Only Rainer and Asia didn't join in glaring at him, the two being the only ones knowing about his connection to the de facto leader of the fallen angels. They also knew that he couldn't tell the devils anything about it because there would be repercussions, to say the least. The fallen angel and the Italian girl shared a quick worried glance before nodding to one another as if they had silently agreed on something. Which they had. When the two would get the chance, they would ask their love interest about what he was hiding from them and the rest of the devils, and, hopefully, they would get the true answer out of his lips. Begrudgingly, the training began with one person at a time, so as for everyone else to listen to Issei's instructions. Curiously enough, Saji Genshiro, one of Sona's pawns, volunteered to be the first, beating Kaneko for it in the process. The training was simple. The defender would be blindfolded and would have to rely on the smallest of sounds to defend themselves, while the crowd around remained completely still and silent so as to not distract the defender. But Issei acting as the offender, of course. Although the brunette refrained from using actual force behind his strikes, he made sure to make enough noise for the defender to actually defend themselves. While the training itself was interesting for everyone present, Issei secretly had fun throughout it. It didn't mean that it wasn't boring for the crowd to watch and hear the same thing over and over again for 3 hours straight. Yet, even after everything was said and done, Riaz and Sona were adamant that the devils return to their duties and perform their contracts or do whatever their kings assigned them to. So, that left Issei and Rainer the odd ones out. The female fallen angel returned to their home, while the brunette chose to go for a walk around town in order to enjoy some peace and quiet. Suddenly, however, one of his tenants made a suggestion. "Why don't you go see the governor of the fallen angels, partner?" That was Drag. Without breaking his leisure stride, Issei spoke aloud since he was all alone. "Why?" he asked simply. "To see if he has any news on the situation with FabvL, of course. After all, as my rival's host pointed out, you're free to do as you please. Especially now that your contract with the two devil girls allows you more movement than the previous one." The dragon responded airily. The brunette hummed thoughtfully for a moment. "You know, Drag, you're absolutely right." He agreed easily, turning around to walk towards his new destination. The dragon in the boosted gear just grunted in acknowledgement before going back to sleep. Issei, on the other hand, just wished that the fallen angel he was about to meet was alone. More specifically, without Volley around. The tingle at the back of his head told him that he shouldn't do that again, otherwise fate would do the opposite just to mess with him. He mentally cursed his luck as he approached Azazel's modest house, picking up Volley's scent already, even at the distance he was. That said, he picked up another scent as well, although this one distinctly more feminine in nature, but strong enough to hide her species. So, knowing that Volley and an unknown to him person was with Azazel, Issei's muscles tensed subtly as he raised his right hand to knock on the door. Hopefully, there won't be any unnecessary fights tonight. Issei knocked on the door thrice, his stoic facial expression masking the mixture of resignation and trepidation he actually felt. "It's open," came Azazel's muffled, nonchalant voice from inside. With a light, resigned sigh the brunette opened the door and entered, going straight towards the living room, where his sensitive nose told him the 3 people were. Said people looked at him with a little surprise when they saw him. In almost less than a second, the securite scanned the room. Azazel and Volley were sitting on their usual spots on the couches, wearing casual clothes, ready to put their glasses of what appeared to be whiskey well, the bottle on the table indicated as much on the table. The sole female in the room, whom Issei managed to peg as a fallen angel from her scent in such a close proximity, was also wearing casual clothes and sat on the couch across from Volley. Although, in her case, the pair of blue jeans and the modest black t-shirt, along with the pair of black low heels, accentuated her curvaceous figure. Her deep purple eyes, long black hair and perfectly shaped face only added to her natural beauty. Well, supernatural, if Issei was honest with himself. Up until this moment, Riaz, Akeno, Rainer and Grafia, not necessarily in that order, were easily the most beautiful women he had ever met. Yet, this woman dwarfed them, albeit by not so large of a margin. Azazel blinked in surprise at his sudden appearance, clearly not expecting him. Vali and the woman got over their surprise quickly. Rival. What are you doing here? The silver-haired young man questioned in obvious curiosity, accompanied with a raised eyebrow. The woman's expression turned to one of surprise yet again, as her mind instantly recognized the way the Hakuryuku addressed the brunette. This brat is the Sekiryute. She wondered as her gaze focused on the aforementioned sacred gear holder. Yo. Issei ignored all the chaos he accidentally caused as he greeted all of them casually with a matching wave of his right hand before he went and sat on the other side of Azazel's couch and boldly filled himself a glass of whiskey, from which he took a sip. Incidentally, the brunette put Azazel in the middle of himself and Vali, while also being close to the sole female in the room. A couple of seconds of awkward silence passed before Azazel broke it. Ice. How come you're here without me summoning you? He asked curiously to break the ice. Issei took another sip of his drink before he spoke. According to Surzich's Lucifer himself, turns out that my contract with Riaz wasn't exactly valid, so he took it upon himself to form a contract that pleases both sides, as well as the Devil Council, once they get wind of it. He explained nonchalantly as he faced the fallen Governor General. Oh. Azazel muttered in realization, but a little surprised that his fellow leader personally intervened. So, what's the new contract? He asked curiously, ignoring the other two that shared his sentiment, even if one of them was totally clueless in everything involving the brunette. Well, I won't bore you with the details, Issei said thoughtfully, pausing just a bit to remember the new contract in detail. But Surzich's struck a very good deal with me. The important part that concerns people like you is that I can do whatever I please, as long as it doesn't bring any harm to Riaz, Sona-san, their peerages and the devils as a whole. He vaguely explained. People like him? The woman parroted in confusion as she looked back and forth at her leader and the brunette. Yeah. Issei said casually as he turned his head to face her and took a sip from his drink. People that aren't related to the devils, but I befriend for one reason or another. He added in the same tone. Azazel didn't show his surprise at the indirect declaration of friendship, but Vali and the woman did by involuntarily widening their eyes. Glad you think of me as a friendly person, Ice. The governor smiled kindly. You and Surzich's seem to be good people. People that I can trust and be allies with. The same with Riaz, Sona-san and their peerages, but you two are leaders of your factions, so I want to catch bigger fish, per se. The Sekiryute said calmly and honestly as he looked the fallen angel leader in the eyes. All three that heard his words were taken aback by them for a moment before they recovered. Azazel grinned sheepishly at being read so easily by someone so young, Vali smirked mysteriously, and the woman looked at the brunette with a scrutinizing gaze, trying to get a read on him. She was inwardly frustrated that she couldn't, especially because he looked and was younger than the Hakuryuku. Thanks for your words, Ice. The older man said gratefully and took a sip of his own drink that he had almost forgotten. He only received an acknowledging nod in return. Then, what about me, rival? Vali questioned eagerly, his mysterious smirk still in place as he leaned forward and placed his elbows on his knees, as if the action would bring him closer to the aforementioned person. Issei calmly locked gazes with his silver-haired counterpart, easily picking up the subtle signs that the latter was ready to throw down at a moment's notice. From what Azazel told me some time ago, you're a battle maniac. That alone is a red flag for me, but I don't get any actual bad vibes from you. So, if you're willing to sit down peacefully and discuss, I'll see if we'll be allies or just acquaintances. He spoke truthfully. Humph. Vali snorted amusingly as he leaned back on the couch, crossed one leg over the other and his arms against his chest. What makes you think that I'll be patient enough to do such a thing? He asked airily, but his slightly narrowed eyes showed his true intentions. I don't. Issei easily admitted, which made the other three blink in surprise, before his eyes narrowed slightly as well. If you want to fight me that badly, we can arrange it. However, if I get the feeling you're an enemy, I can't guarantee that you'll be left in a good condition afterwards. His warning/threat was heard loud and clear by all three. Azazel and the woman tensed at the tension that rose in the air. Even though both expected it to some degree, it was already thick enough to be cut by a knife. Vali, on the other hand, seemed both amused and excited. Ho-oh. He almost snorted as he tilted his head slightly to the right. Do you want to find out now, rival? Even though it sounded like a suggestion, it was clear that the silver-haired young man wanted nothing more than to act on his words right then and there. Much to the woman's curiosity, Issei rolled his eyes unconcerned as he leaned back on the couch and spoke nonchalantly, just as Azazel was about to do something to diffuse the tension. "Nah." The brunette shook his head. "As I said, it will be arranged. Preferably after the situation with FabvL is resolved." Before the woman could voice the surprise she felt that the young man knew about the actions of one of her brethren, Azazel chose that moment to speak. "I guess that's the real reason you're here, then?" he questioned casually. Before Issei could respond in any way, the woman almost exploded as she got up from the couch she occupied. "Hold up. Hold up." She exclaimed as her eyes continuously exchanged between the three males in the room, who looked at her a little surprised at her outburst. "Can someone explain to me what the hell's going on?" Almost an entire minute passed in awkward silence, which broke at the sound of Issei standing up from the couch and facing her, gaining her undivided attention. "I'm Haidu Issei. But, as you've already heard by now, Azazel and people close to me call me Ice, since I'm not one for formalities. Also, I'm this generation's Securite and contracted magician to Gremory Riaz and Citri Sona." He introduced himself in a calm tone, followed by a shallow yet respectful bow of his head, as it was the norm for Japanese people like him. Azazel and Vali blinked in surprise at the addition of the Citri girl, but didn't comment on it since it wasn't their business. The woman stayed silent for a moment as her mind worked on what she just learned and what she had seen so far. The brunette was affiliated with the Devils, yet he had a good relationship with the Fallen, if his interactions with her leader were any indication. There was no way he didn't know that Vali was his opposite, considering that the latter addressed him as nothing else than rival. Also, for some reason, he was aware that FabvL was up to no good, but not too much it seemed. While Issei waited patiently for her to say anything, even just introduce herself, he was keenly aware that she was thinking of something concerning him, but he didn't say anything else. Then, the woman locked eyes with Azazel, and the man showed her a reassuring smile and a matching nod. Getting the meaning behind her leader's actions, the woman relaxed her tense posture and looked back at the brunette with a stoic expression. "I'm Penemu, a cadre class fallen angel and Azazel's secretary in the Grigori." She finally introduced herself in a tone that perfectly matched her expression. Inwardly, Issei compared her to Graphia. These two were eerily similar when wearing stoic expressions on their faces. Sona and Tsubaki should take lessons from them. Kaneko as well. "She's also the person that trained Rainer for 10 days during your absence," Azazel pointed out nonchalantly as he sipped from his drink. Issei and Penemu returned to their seats, still locking gazes as they subconsciously mimicked the fallen angel leader and sipped from their own glasses. Both were trying to get an accurate read of one another. The silent stare-off continued for a couple of minutes before they broke it off, both coming up almost empty in their quest. The only thing they got was that the other was a good person at heart and nothing else. "Speaking of my absence," Issei said casually as he faced Azazel once more. "Did you manage to watch the rating game?" he asked curiously, taking a long sip from his drink afterwards. "Unfortunately, no." Azazel sighed dejectedly as he finished his drink and immediately refilled his glass from the whiskey bottle. Apparently, the raiding game was privy to the Gremory and Phoenix households, along with the Satans. He added in the same dejected manner. "I see." Issei muttered thoughtfully as he finished his own drink before he refilled his glass. In all seriousness, this was a good thing. The underworld was still hugely unaware of him and his powers, and it meant that Vali hadn't seen them. Especially his dragon-slaying abilities. "Heard anything, then?" he asked curiously again, trying to subtly pry for leaked information about the aforementioned event. "Just that the Phoenix Devil was absolutely demolished by you," Vali interjected with calm amusement. "No details were leaked, aside from the fact that your flames were stronger than his. And that was me holding back severely," Issei thought to himself sarcastically. "Still though, who told you that?" he asked suspiciously with slightly narrowed eyes. "Surziches," Azazel responded casually. "There was no way for him to hide an event like this from me in heaven, considering that the Securite played a major role in its outcome. And, apart from the destructive capabilities of your flames, he shared no other details about the raiding game." Issei didn't even dare to show his relief. However, if he didn't change the subject, he was pretty sure that the three would try to get some information out of him. Information that he didn't want to reveal, in case FabvL got wind of it and prepared accordingly. Thinking of it, he remembered the original reason for his visit and how it digressed from Penemu's outburst. "Did you tell him anything about FabvL, then?" he asked airily. The other three were experienced enough to see that he wanted to change the subject for some reason, but played along. "No," Azazel replied firmly. "While I do have new information about his escapades, it's too early to say anything to the devils in heaven." "I still don't understand why the brat knows about FabvL," Penemu muttered under her breath in wonder as she sipped from her drink, unsurprised that she was completely ignored. "News?" Issei probed patiently. He's gone after some holy swords that several churches in Europe guard under heaven's orders, already having stolen 2 of them. It won't be long before he finishes with that and, if I'm right, comes to Kuo to start causing mayhem due to the presence of 2 relatives of the current Mao. The fallen leader explained in a slightly defeated tone. Issei didn't care much about the details of FabvL's plan. He just wanted to keep Kuo, Rainer, his parents, Riaz, Sona and their peerages safe from whatever chaos Azazil's subordinate had in mind. That said, you've said before that there are 2 relatives of the Mao in Kuo. He pointed out in wonder. I already know that Surzic's-san and Riaz are siblings, but who's Sona-san's sibling? The 3 internally gave him credit for his perceptiveness, even if it was a little obvious in hindsight that the Citri heiress could only be related to a Mao. Surprisingly, it was Penemu that answered him in a professional tone. It's FabvL Leviathan. The strongest female devil, her power over ice magic surpassing even Greyfia Lucifuge, the strongest queen and FabvL's contender for the title of Leviathan. And, like Surzic's Lucifer, FabvL Leviathan is a widely known cis-con. That mostly explains why the Mao would interfere when FabvL comes to Kuo. Issei hummed thoughtfully as he looked at his almost finished second drink. Even if it took a month for the Cadre-class fallen angel to complete his plans, which Issei severely doubted would take so long, the devils and Rainer wouldn't be ready for what was to come. Not even with the training he started a few hours ago. Which meant that it would have to be himself that had to deal with FabvL. The others would deal with whatever minions the fallen angel might have with him. There was no way the cadre had someone as strong as himself or, worse, Issei under his command. Issei didn't mind the setup, by the way. He knew he was powerful enough to deal with FabvL, and, as long as his minions were around the level of someone like, say, Fried Selzen, then he could easily put his trust in them. The other 3 saw his thoughtful expression and that for the past 2 minutes he was lost in thought but didn't say anything, waiting for him patiently to think things through. Speaking of, Issei came up with some form of payment for his services. So, since I'll be the one to deal with FabvL, how about we form a contract of sorts? He suggested to the fallen angel leader. Penemu looked skeptical that the brunette was strong enough to beat her fellow fallen angel, but kept her mouth shut when there was not an objection of some kind from the other 2 in the room. I'm game. Azazil easily agreed. My only term is that FabvL remains alive for questioning when the time comes. He all but demanded. Unless he kills one of the people that I'm close with, then you can be certain that he'll be alive after I'm done with him. Issei negotiated firmly. Again, Penemu was left almost dumbfounded at the kid's confidence. Cadre-class fallen angels were no joke in terms of power, and the brunette seemed to brush said power off as inconsequential. It made her wonder just how strong he truly was, considering she was one herself. Of course, she wasn't the only one. Everyone that had met the current Sekiryuite had the same question somewhere in their heads. Acceptable. Azazil nodded in acknowledgement of the point. He knew the only thing that humans and dragons had in common, and that was acting on their emotions. Issei was essentially both a human and a dragon, so he couldn't do anything to prevent FabvL's potential death if the latter's actions warranted it. But Issei nodded back in satisfaction. Then, I want you to make sure that both of my parents and Rainer get a very generous monthly income, pay their yearly taxes, and, lastly, make sure that Rainer becomes strong enough to put FabvL to shame. All that until my parents die of old age and Rainer is powerful enough to fear only top-tier beings. He proposed nonchalantly. Deal. Azazil agreed immediately, and the 2 shook hands over their agreement before the fallen angel leader wrote the details on paper and the 2 proceeded to sign it. While greatly amused, Vali was also jealous at the close bond his rival seemed to have with his parents. He was also intrigued that his rival didn't ask anything for himself. Penemu shared the Hakuryuku's feelings on the matter, with the addition of her own incredulousness at the absurdity of his demands. Why the hell did Azazil agree to this contract so easily? For that matter, why the hell did she care so much in the first place? She had to find out. At a later time, though. Probably after this whole mess was over and done with. Pleasure to do business with you. Issei said airily as he finished his second drink and refilled his glass. The pleasure is all mine, Ice. Azazil mimicked the brunette's tone as he sipped from his drink. Though, I'm curious as to why you didn't ask anything for yourself. He wondered. I told you that Surzic's-san struck me a very good deal, so let's leave it at that. Issei almost deadpanned. Right. Azazil sweat-dropped as he spoke slowly, knowing better than to pry for any more information about said deal. Vali and Penemu shared his sentiments, and even the sweat drops. So Penemu trailed off as she wanted to change the subject into one that she was greatly curious about. How come you and Vali aren't on each other's throats? She asked. That's a good question. Azazil and Vali said in sync, sounding both eager and curious about his answer. On the other hand, Issei was curious about something else. Why should we? He wondered genuinely, looking at all three of them and taking note of their momentarily dumbfounded expressions. Is there something I don't know? He asked cluelessly. At that moment, both the boosted gear and the divine dividing appeared on their respective hosts in flashes of crimson and white. Although Issei's was a gauntlet, Volley's was a pair of white draconic wings with shining blue gems here and there. Honestly, Issei thought that Volley's sacred gear looked cooler. He didn't dare to tell this to Drake, though, for obvious reasons. I see that you haven't told anything to your host, Red One. A deep rumbling voice sounded from Volley's wings, the gems of which glowed deep blue with each word. Its tone was aggressively mocking in nature. So much so that Issei thought that it fit Volley perfectly. I didn't want to add on his already heavy burden, White One. Drake defended himself firmly, almost aggressively. Hearing the two dragons ready to tear each other's throats, even if it was physically impossible, made Issei look at both sacred gears in a deadpan. Why do I get the feeling that I won't like what I'll hear about you two, he stated dryly more than questioned. Azazel couldn't stop the amused snort that escaped his mouth while ignoring the half-heated glares he received from the hosts of the heavenly dragons. Enemu just shook her head in disappointment, knowing what would follow. Me and Albion are rivals even before the Great War. Drake started explaining seriously to his wielder. We have fought against one another for as long as I remember, and that didn't stop even when we were sealed by the biblical god. Our hosts are destined to fight like us until one stands victorious. Don't forget that we developed abilities of our own because your flames and my poison were proved to be pointless when we used it on one another. Albion added his 2 cents. That's interesting. Issei said truthfully. But why did you start fighting in the first place? Or, better yet, why make your hosts go through your feud so adamantly? He basically demanded. Truth be told, I don't remember what started our highly destructive fights. Understatement of the millennia in Azazel's and Penemu's opinion. However, at some point, it was just our pride as powerful dragons to be better than the other. Drake admitted it easily. And that pride continues to this day. Albion added in the same tone as his rival. Even as we speak, our hosts have equal results. 300 people have died by the hands of the divine dividing and another 300 by the boosted gear. Issei didn't like the fact that people died over a pointless rivalry, in his and most others' opinion, but couldn't do anything to change the past. Instead, he could change the future. Is that why you want to fight me so badly? He asked his counterpart seriously. Partly. Volley admitted with a nod of his head. I want to fight strong opponents and, from what I've previously felt, you're easily one of those. He explained nonchalantly. Then again, you and others are just a stepping stone to my ultimate goal. He added as an afterthought. Which is? Issei probed, genuinely curious as to what kind of goal a battlemaniac like his counterpart could have. To defeat Great Red and become the true White Dragon God Emperor. Volley responded firmly, his eyes almost glowing blue in determination. For 2 seconds, Issei and Penemu, the latter of whom heard of this for the first time like the former, were stunned and awed at his goal. None of them laughed, though, because, in hindsight, it was a respectable goal, no matter the motives behind it. Then, I guess that the other part is that you just want to continue the completely and utterly pointless rivalry between our sacred gears. Issei questioned almost rhetorically, purposefully insulting the two dragons' feud in their metaphorical faces. It should be noted that he spoke with a completely straight and serious expression. Drake and Albion sputtered incoherently at his insult, while Volley couldn't help but snort in amusement. Penemu and Azazel shared the silver-haired young man's sentiment and outright laughed, making the two dragons feel clearly embarrassed and returned to the minds of their hosts in the hopes of avoiding further humiliation. When you put it like that, Volley couldn't stop another chuckle escape from his lips as he paused. Then, no. He relented. Let's just keep to the I want to face strong opponents part. He added casually, using his fingers to put air quotes for his repeated sentence. Good, cause I've no intention to fight for Drake's pride. I have my own pride and goals, so Drake can wait for his next host to continue this feud. Issei said seriously. Then, what are your goals? Penemu asked curiously, knowing that Azazel and Volley were interested as well. Nothing as grand as surpassing Great Red for my own pride, but you could say that it's linked in a twisted way. I want to be strong enough to protect my loved ones and even the world from anything harmful. So, if that means that I have to be stronger than Great Red, then I have to surpass that level of power. Issei explained calmly as he locked gazes with the sole female of the room. At that moment, Penemu's heart skipped a beat. The hosts of the heavenly dragons were polar opposites in more ways than one, and she was inwardly embarrassed that she felt an attraction to the brunettes' selflessness. Especially because she was thousands of years older than him. And yet, this boy was the first one she had ever encountered to put his life on the line for others' sake. She would have to give some thought over this at a later time and possibly discuss this with him, but clearly now was not the time. Volley, for his part, didn't laugh at his rival's goal. He could respect the desire to protect loved ones, but he hadn't been raised with that kind of mentality to think like that. Before Azazel took him in, that is. Yet, that wasn't enough to change his mind. When he would become strong enough, he would outright kill that man first and aim towards the top later. That didn't mean, however, that his point of view on things regarding the reasons why he wanted to get stronger didn't change in the slightest. So, he too would have to give some thought to his rival's words. The night ended with some light jokes here and there after the heavy talk was over, before Issei got up and went back to his home. Only to find Rainer, Riaz and Asia on his bed with the same clothes or lack thereof as the night before, sleeping somewhat restlessly. He sighed fondly at the sight, took a shower and carefully joined them in bed. Immediately, the three girls latched onto him subconsciously and instantly, their sleep turned peaceful with matching smiles. Riaz put his right arm between her breasts, and the same thing did Rainer on his left, with Asia using his left thigh as a pillow, hugging it tightly at that, and the rest of his leg as a mattress, with most of her body curling into a ball to fit on the bed. Again, Issei sighed fondly at the what would be a normal occurrence from this point onwards, before he closed his eyes. At least, he managed to be at peace for a small while on his bed. Because, as soon as he reopened his eyes, he was forced to fight his two tenants as was the usual most of the nights. The days passed by fairly quickly. So much so that it felt like a week passed just like a flash. It was Saturday and Issei decided to give the members of the two peerages a day off from their training on Sunday. After all, in most cases, pushing oneself to their limit and beyond can be counterproductive when they need the best results as soon as possible. That said, the host of the Red Dragon Emperor was greatly disappointed with the progress everyone was making, considering they were supernatural species. Only Kaneko, Yudo and, surprisingly, Saji showed great potential in the technique he was trying to teach. Everyone else sucked at it, for lack of a better term. Sadly, this included, but not limited to, Asia and Rainer. Why is that? Issei wondered aloud as he was at the park where he had ended his date with the female fallen angel at his house, sitting at the fateful bench. Also, it was late at night and the devils were attending to their contracts while Rainer got back home to have a shower and rest. Lastly, he was all alone. Meaning that he could converse with his two tenants without being concerned that he could be seen as crazy. Honestly, I shouldn't be surprised that it doesn't work the way we thought. Zangetsu replied airily in his mind. Again, why is that? The brunette asked, this time with a hint of frustration added to his wonder. Probably because most of the devils you teach excel in something else than technique. Drake gave his input wisely. Most of them are magic users or straight-up power types, but their technique is severely lacking. From what I've seen, Yudo-kun is the only one that can be considered a technique type. Issei retorted conversationally, silently acknowledging the dragon's point. That doesn't explain Kaneko-san and Saji-san, though. True. The sword spirit nodded in agreement. But you forget one crucial thing for each one of those two. He added in the same tone as his wielder. Issei frowned in thought as he tried to remember what made those two somewhat more special than the rest of the devils and Rainer. Don't fry your brain while thinking about it, partner. Drake said calmly, making his host glare at his left arm half-heartedly, which he ignored. As I've told you before, the short devil is a nekomata of some kind. Even if she hasn't shown any signs of her power over Senjutsu, her innate instincts as a yokai make her adapt to what you're training them quite easily. As for Citri's pawn, it's a little more straightforward, he has a dragon-based sacred gear. Even if he's a reincarnated devil, his sacred gear makes him part dragon, whether he knows it or not. As such, all of his instincts are better than even your average high-class devil, which includes the two kings of the peerages that you're interested in. I get it now. Issei nodded in understanding, choosing to ignore the latest comment about his infatuation with Riaz and Sona. Good. Zangetsu sighed in satisfaction before he went back to the depths of his wielder's inner world to sit back and relax. The dragon in the brunette sacred gear gave a grunt of acknowledgement before he copied his roommate and went to sleep. Issei got the silent message that he too needed a break and, as such, it seemed today was his day off from sparring with his two tenants. He picked his phone from the right pocket of his pants tracksuit to see the time. It was 2200 hours p.m. Most of the world's population would consider this time to be somewhat early to be at their homes or even go to bed. However, in Japan, people tended to fall asleep at this time in order to get up early the next day to do whatever they had to do. Or, at least, spend some quality time with their loved ones before going to sleep around midnight. So, with that knowledge, Issei chose to spend an hour or so on meditation before he went back to his home. Rainer was restless. Her body may be tired from the training that her love interest was putting her and the town's devils through, but her mind didn't let her rest at all. Since the first day of training, she and Asia had a faint idea as to what was bothering Issei, but they hadn't had a chance to confront him about it, considering their reluctance over the matter and the fatigue from training. Speaking of, she knew that she had made almost no progress at all in starting up her fighting instincts. So, the frustration from her lack of progress only added to her restlessness. She had seen the same sentiment to the rest of the devils that weren't Kaneko, Yudo and Saji, who were far above herself and the others in the aspect Issei was training them for, but she couldn't find it in her being to care about them in the slightest. The hot shower she had helped in calming her down a bit, but she wasn't in a state to get asleep just yet. And just as she was about to sigh in dejection over her thoughts and try to get some zs, the door to Issei's room, where she was at, lying on his bed in the same attire as every night, opened and her eyes widened at the sight of the very young man that occupied most of her thoughts entering the room in nothing but his plain black boxers. Normally, Rainer would have almost drooled at the sight. However, her mind reminded her that this was a chance to get some answers from him. "Hello, Ice-kun." She greeted him casually as she sat up on the bed. "Yo." Issei greeted back in the same tone as he went to his wardrobe to get a fresh pair of boxers, wanting to have a shower of his own to get rid of the slight stench of sweat on his person. "Can we talk for a minute?" she requested as calmly as she could. Just as he grabbed another pair of plain black boxers, Issei paused, with his back facing the fallen angel in the room. Slowly, he turned around and raised an eyebrow in a mixture of confusion and curiosity at her somewhat serious expression. "What is it?" he asked. Rainer took a small calming breath before she addressed him seriously. "The true reason behind our training. All I can think of is that it has to do with your connection to Azazel-sama and you can't let the devils know about it." Issei had to give her credit. For a low-class fallen angel, Rainer was perceptive. Especially since she had almost no clues over the matter. He almost smiled at his own thoughts, but refrained from doing so. "It's scary that you came to an almost correct conclusion without me saying anything back then," he admitted with a resigned sigh as he took a seat at the chair of his desk and faced Rainer. The fallen angel slightly narrowed her eyes in suspicion, but didn't say anything. She knew that her facial expression alone was enough to tell him start talking. Issei sighed one more time before he too became serious. "You have to promise me, Rainer, that what I'm about to tell you will never leave your lips. Not even to Asia." His obvious demand was met with Rainer's further narrowed eyes as she straightened herself, almost like she was ready for a fight at a moment's notice. She gave a slow nod to show that she understood the necessity of her sealed lips on the matter. "Some time ago, Azazel warned me about a subordinate of his that has gone against his peaceful mentality. The subordinate's actions are nefarious, to say the least. So much so, in fact, that they're considered very dangerous to the relationships between the three biblical factions," Issei explained vaguely, albeit seriously. Rainer leaned forward as her eyes narrowed even further. "Do you know anything else, Issei?" she outright demanded in a questioning tone. "Yeah." The brunette nodded. "Azazel's subordinate has most likely their sights on Kuo after they finish up their plan in Europe." Again, he was vague. He didn't want to tell her the whole truth immediately in case she had a negative reaction. Speaking of, Rainer wanted to slap him silly because he was beating around the bush. "Issei, tell me the truth. What the hell's going on?" She sighed in frustration as she tried to speak to him calmly. "Don't you trust me?" she added with an equally frustrated glare. Issei's serious facade softened a little at the last question. He was about to answer her the obvious "I trust you." But there was a better way to do that. Especially since there was a possibility for Rainer to face one of FabvL's followers. That is, if the latter would even bring his followers in the first place. "Last week, after I trained all of you for the first time, I visited Azazel again in order to have more information about the situation I'm about to tell you. As it stands, FabvL and an unknown number of his followers are in the process of stealing holy swords from the churches in Europe. We speculate that, once he's done, he'll come here to Kuo, probably because Riaz and Sona are here and are siblings to two of the four Mao. This obviously means that his actions alone could start another war between the three factions. A war that, according to what little I understand, none of the factions can afford as it could make them all go almost extinct. Unfortunately, Azazel thinks that FabvL is almost done with his business in Europe and is close to coming here. That's why I'm training all of you so urgently," he explained in a soft tone. He was unsurprised by her following reaction. Rainer's eyes were wide open in utter disbelief as her mind processed the gravity of the situation. Once that was done, her expression turned to a furious snarl. Her body went on autopilot and she found herself looming over Issei's calm posture. Without realizing, her eyes were shedding tears of frustration and both her hands were clenched in tight fists, ready to start pounding his face to vent her raging emotions. Without warning, the fallen angel started punching his face and an occasional fist found its target on his chest. Her breathing was erratic and came out from her harshly grinding teeth. Issei, for his part, took all of the punishment without changing his calm facial expression, nor showing any sign of pain. Not that he felt any physical pain to begin with, but that wasn't the point. He could see that the fallen angel was in some emotional turmoil, and her raging emotions made it difficult to read them through her face or even her fists. Eventually, Rainer was out of energy and her movements became sluggish. Her knees buckled from her fatigue and she fell on them while she kept pounding his thighs with no power behind her strikes as her head lowered so that her teary eyes stared at the floor. Internally, she cursed her powerlessness for the uptime time. She felt two soft, warm hands clasp her own heavily trembling ones in a gentle grip. With her mind occupied, she failed to feel when the brunette brought her in a gentle comforting embrace while sitting on his chair. Once her mind picked up this detail, she calmed down considerably and felt herself returning the embrace, albeit in a tight grip, as if she was afraid to lose him. The room became quiet, aside from Rainer's occasional sniffling. The brunette started softly caressing her smooth and silky black hair with his left hand, while his left administered the same treatment on her back. "I honestly don't know what's on your mind, Ray-chan," Issei said softly as he closed his eyes and continued his comforting ministrations on the fallen angel that turned to a vulnerable teenage girl in a matter of seconds. "All I can say to you is that everything will be alright," he reassured. Hearing that, Rainer tightened her hold on him, knowing that he wasn't uncomfortable and buried her face to the crook of his neck. For a few moments, the room was almost completely silent once more, with the only sound being the duo's breathing and the rustling of Rainer's nightgown as Issei caressed her back. Surprisingly, the fallen angel broke the embrace gently as she backed up a bit and lifted her head to look at the brunette in the eyes. Issei brought his hands to her face and cleaned the last of her tears that leaked from her red from crying eyes with his thumbs. Rainer's expression showed a lot of emotions, the most prominent of which was sadness, closely followed by helplessness and worry. The secretary didn't say anything, opting for his calm demeanor to relay the same silent message as his last words to her did, that everything would be fine. Neither of the two said anything for what felt like hours, but it was only a couple of minutes just staring at each other's eyes without even blinking. The silence was broken by the fallen angel girl as she voiced a question in a soft yet clearly worried tone. "What have you agreed with Azazel-sama, Ice-kun?" Issei had the urge to turn away from her gaze at the question, but refused to. Nonetheless, he answered truthfully in an equally soft manner. "I'll deal with FabvL in his stead and keep our connection a secret for the time being from Rias and Sona in order to avoid unnecessary tension between the fallen and the devils, considering that Rias and Sona are siblings to two of the Mau. As I fight FabvL, Rias, Sona and their peerages will deal with his minions, while you'll stay here and protect my parents. Well, at least that's the plan I have come up with." Truth be told, Rainer wanted nothing more than to fight alongside Issei, but had the sense of mind that she was nowhere near strong enough to fight against a cadre-class fallen angel. Not that the devils of this town had a chance without their siblings' help either, and it seemed that her love interest was of the same mind. From his explanation, it was obvious that Issei wanted this situation to be as harmless to the devils and herself as possible. And, while she didn't know how powerful the secretary was, she was optimistic enough to believe that he would defeat FabvL, considering what she had seen at the raiding game some days ago, and she knew that his display was just the tip of the iceberg. It was for all of these reasons that she cursed her powerlessness and conceded his point for her to stay out of harm's way with the pretext to protect his parents. "Will you be alright?" she asked tentatively, putting emphasis to the certain word out of worry. "Yeah." Issei smiled reassuringly, inwardly glad that she seemed to have calmed down completely. "I can't leave you, Asia-chan and my parents alone, can I?" he asked jokingly. "You better not." Rainer pouted cutely, almost childishly, as she answered. Issei's smile widened a small fraction, satisfied with the overall outcome, before he stood up. "Where are you going?" Rainer asked in confusion as she stood up herself, ignoring her body's protests. "To have a shower and get to bed," Issei replied, smiling still in place, before he started making his way to his door. He didn't tell her about his day off from sparring with his tenants because he knew that it would be counterproductive to his much-needed rest. Rainer smiled at his back because of his answer and got herself comfortable on the bed. Just as she heard the sound of rushing water, she fell asleep. 5 minutes later, Rias and Asia appeared through a crimson magic circle and immediately got ready to sleep in their usual attires. Well, in Ria's case, she lacked one, considering she slept in the nude. Thankfully, none of the other girls, or even Issei, had any problems with her nudity. Anyway, the two devils promptly fell asleep due to another tiring day of training and contracts. Although, neither took notice of Rainer's small smile on her lips. Issei got back to his room 10 minutes later, refreshed due to the shower he just had, already aware that the devil girls had returned earlier. He smiled fondly at the sight of the 3 girls on his bed, positioned in such a way that would put him in his usual situation, his body restrained by the girls and in a way that he couldn't move unless he made them uncomfortable. He shook his head in fond exasperation as he slipped on the bed, lying on his back, with the girls instinctively subconsciously latching onto him. It took less than a minute before he too fell asleep. Issei groggily opened his eyes, feeling an odd mixture of fatigue and refreshness. Just as he sat up on the bed with a groan of exertion and stretched his upper body in normally uncomfortable angles to get rid of the kinks, his mind caught onto a detail that wasn't in his daily routine. Asia, Rainer and Riaz weren't on his bed with him. Curiosity settling in, he got up and took a look at his phone to see the time. 10 a.m. Huh? He muttered in confusion. How come did I slept for 10 hours straight and nobody woke me up? You hadn't noticed it, partner, but you had accumulated too much fatigue and stress in your system. Your body tries to extract them on its own in your sleep. Another 2-hour nap after lunch should complete the process. Greg explained calmly. Oh. Issei breathed dumbly with a matching blink of his eyes. Good morning, Drake. He added as an afterthought. Good morning to you as well, partner. The dragon replied casually, before retreating to his own world. The brunette was about to greet his other tenant, but the loud snore he heard in his mind made him pause for a moment before he shook his head in amusement. He put on his scarf and a pair of grey tracksuit pants before he went to the restroom for his morning business. His nose and ears told him that Riaz was still at his house. More specifically, she was in the kitchen, helping Rainer and Asia to prepare lunch under his mother's supervision, while his father was in the living room watching the news on television. On a side note, he was glad that Riaz seemed to have absolutely no problem with Rainer. Well, nobody from the Devils had, now that he thought about it. Even Akeno seemed mostly accustomed to the fallen angel girl for some reason. Especially since the latter was utterly indifferent to all of the Devils, aside from Riaz and Asia. She was on obviously friendly terms with those two. But that last thought, Issei exited the restroom and made his way downstairs and towards the kitchen to greet the majority of the house's residents, silent as ever. Good morning, everyone. He greeted nonchalantly as he took a seat at the table, a small yawn escaping his lips involuntarily. To their credit, none of the women got scared by his abrupt appearance. Good morning, Honey-san Issei-kun. Kaden, Asia, Riaz and Rainer in that exact order greeted him back in various ways of happiness and matching smiles on their faces before they turned back to their tasks. The brunette couldn't stop the warm smile that came on his face at the greeting he got. A moment later, his father joined him at the table, sitting at the opposite end of its head, yet right beside his son, both of them content with silently observing the animated females of the house working on their lunch. As Riaz was waiting for a half-full pot of water to boil, she remembered a suggestion she had made to her contracted magician before the raiding game. Akasama. She called out with one eye paying attention to the pot and the other on the Haidu matriarch. Yes, Riaz-chan. Kaden called back as she approached the redeed, mindful that Asia and Rainer were cutting vegetables behind her back. Do you need something? Two things, actually. Riaz responded conversationally, gaining the undivided attention of the original Haidu family, while the other two girls pretended to be oblivious and focused on their tasks. Kaden spared a moment to look at her husband and son in confusion. Unfortunately, it seemed, she wouldn't get any answers from them, since they shared her sentiment. What is it, dear? She asked as she faced the redeed again. Nothing too serious. Riaz reassured her with an easy tone and a matching wave of her right hand, accompanied with an equally relaxed smile. I just remembered a proposition I had made to Ice about you 2 weeks ago while we were on our trip for our assignment. She explained airily. Issei's eyes widened slightly in recognition as to what she was referring to. I had honestly forgotten about that. He thought to himself in surprise before he schooled his features as another thought came to him. But I can't let Riaz know about my deal with Azazel. Not yet, at least. So, let's just hope that Kachan will refuse the offer. Proposition. Goro muttered in confusion as he looked at his son for some kind of explanation. The Haidu patriarch's voice drew the attention of the two conversing females, and upon seeing where he was looking at, they looked at Issei too. Seeing 3 pairs of eyes on his person, Issei gave a small sigh in defeat before he spoke as he focused a relaxed gaze on his mother. Well, Riaz thought that you could work for her family as a cook, Kachan. Truth be told, the proposition was for me as well, but, at the time, I had told Riaz that we would discuss this sometime after our assignment. However, as the days passed, I forgot about it. He elaborated thoroughly in the redeed's stead, his tone nonchalant, including the part about his lack of memory on the subject. Kaden and Goro looked at each other in surprise for a moment, during which Riaz sent her contracted magician an adorable pout that he forgot about their agreement. Asia and Rainer giggled quietly as they continued on their tasks. After getting out of their surprise, Kaden and Goro had a silent conversation through their eyes alone, which lasted only half a minute. The result was that the Haidu patriarch to shrug his shoulders helplessly as if to say do what you want. To his wife. Sighing in defeat at her husband's lack of help in her mind, Akane turned to face Riaz with a complicated expression. I don't know about this, Riaz-chan. After I got married to Goru-kun, I stayed at home to take care of our home and my husband while he works so that we can live comfortably. I haven't thought about getting a job ever since. She replied honestly. Riaz seemed disheartened over the answer she got, and Issei cursed his guarded heart for being so soft at the sight because it made him feel a small pang of hurt and guilt. So, after letting out a heavy sigh that drew the attention from everyone in the room, the brunette spoke in what he hoped to be a comforting yet serious tone. Ka-chan, if you want to get this job, me and Toussaint won't stop you. He briefly paused to glance at his father, who nodded at him with a proud smile that he took the initiative in this situation, before he focused back on his mother and continued in the same tone. You don't have to worry about me, since you know I can take care of everything and everyone in our home. Plus, Ray-chan and Asia-chan are big girls, and they too can take care of themselves. Riaz too, whenever she comes over. Even as he spoke, Issei had another thought about his interference. Well, it wouldn't hurt for Ka-chan to have another source of income, aside from what I agreed with Azazel. After all, it'll be the same with Toussaint and partly with Ray-chan. At this point, after hearing Issei's encouraging words towards his indecisive mother, the attention moved to the latter, with Riaz being internally grateful at her contracted magician and outwardly hopeful that Akane would accept the proposition. Asia and Rainer had stopped their task for the moment, unable to focus on it due to the conversation, while Goru sent his wife an equally encouraging nod to help her decide what to do about this sudden opportunity. Truth be told, Akane felt a little pressured over the matter. Especially since it was so suddenly brought up by their guest. However, she was old and experienced enough to know that opportunities like that normally don't come up. It's like it was a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing, and she honestly didn't want to pass up. Also, it would raise some of the burden her husband had for so many years in terms of workload and finances for their home. Alright, Riaz-chan, I accept. Akane said with a decisive nod, accompanied with a small, still a little unsure smile that no one bothered to comment on. All the other members of the household smiled warmly at the matriarch. Great. Riaz smiled beautifully as she spoke cheerfully. Then, I'll have a word with the higher-ups from the school so that you can come as a cook at the academy's cafeteria. The school. 5 different voices asked simultaneously in confusion. Yes. Riaz's smile widened and seemed quite proud. My family, the Gremory family, own Kuo Academy, so I have some influence. Also, if I convince them for you to take the job, you won't have to work far away from your home and you can be back right after school hours end. She explained in almost animated excitement. It went without saying that the fact that Riaz's family owned Kuo Academy was a surprise to everybody else. Although, Issei believed that he should have seen something like that coming, considering that Riaz was the main devil in charge of Kuo Town and that her brother was one of the 4 Mao. Nonetheless, this was an even better opportunity than Akane and Goru could have hoped for. Because, honestly speaking, while happy that they had 2 daughters-in-law, the expenses were demanding and Goru's improved income alone wouldn't be enough. Especially since Riaz-chan practically lived with them ever since the children had returned from their trip for an unknown assignment that the parents didn't want to know about. That said, the redeed gave the parents, especially Akane, a golden opportunity on the best quality plate, so they had to repay her in some way. Then, if that's the case, tell your family that we will take care of you in our home, Riaz-chan. In other words, you'll come to live here and we won't take no for an answer. Goru said in a tone that was a mixture of demanding strictness and parental kindness. Akane was the only one unfazed by his words and nodded in agreement. The kids, though, were another matter entirely. They were caught completely off guard and, thus, their eyes widened in disbelief and their jaws almost slackened as they dropped towards the ground. Including Riaz, of course. However, once the redeed regained her bearings, she wore a radiant smile and hugged the matriarch for all she was worth. Thank you, Akasama. She exclaimed happily, already switching honorifics when addressing her. I like the sound of that. Akane whispered softly on Ria's shoulder, while her husband cried in I'm waterfalls behind his glasses in gratitude that their new daughter-in-law was such a good and helpful girl. In the background. Ooh, now I'll have less of a chance with Ria's one Isama living with us, Asia muttered dejectedly as she returned to cutting vegetables with obviously less vigor than earlier. Don't worry, Asia-chan. Rainer muttered reassuringly as she followed Asia's lead, albeit seemingly unaffected by this new development. We haven't lost anything. And, even if that was the case, I wouldn't leave you behind. Asia looked at the fallen angel with a teary smile of gratitude. Thank you, Rainer-san. Think nothing of it. Rainer smiled back at the younger girl. While Riaz returned to her own task and Akane got back to giving instructions over their lunch, poor Issei's brain was fried at the sudden development. The brunette had even heard the small conversation between Asia and Rainer as had Ria's, but she was too happy to react to their words, but he had been in the process of rebooting his mind, so it was like he didn't hear it in the first place. Due to the way he was raised, Issei expected his parents to show some form of gratitude towards Ria's, but he never expected them to invite her to live in their home. Without the power of hypnosis to boot. It was almost like his parents were manipulated to invite Ria's to live in their home, but he refused to believe such a thing, even if he thought that the redhead was most certainly capable of something of this magnitude due to her selfishness. When his mind rebooted, he immediately schooled his expression to be calm and collected, even as he was still surprised and was screaming his lungs out in frustration on the inside, unavoidably waking up his tenants. Speaking of whom, both took a look at his recent memories and, while they wanted to laugh uproariously at their wielder's reaction to the news of Ria's being allowed to move in with the Haidu family, they were forced to look at the big picture. In short, Issei couldn't make his moves like visiting Azazel without the redhead asking questions that the brunette couldn't give an answer to, something that could form a rift in their relationship as a devil with a contracted magician. Something that would be counterproductive in the situation with FabvL. Alas, Issei had to keep quiet about his thoughts on the matter, since he didn't want to raise suspicion on Ria's or, worse, Sona, should the latter learn about the hypothetically negative scenario. The secretary was quiet during lunch as well, after which he was about to excuse himself to take a much-needed nap as he put his plates in the sink. However, as the others were just about finishing up, Ria's gained the attention of the room as she called out to him. "Hey Ice." "Yeah?" He called back as he turned to face her with a raised eyebrow in curiosity. "Do you mind if next Friday we have the club's meeting in this house?" The redhead asked politely, sparing a glance to her contracted magician's parents as well for clearance. Issei, his parents, Asia and Rainer blinked in confusion at her odd request. "Why?" The young brunette asked with a tilt of his head to his right. "Well, all the clubrooms are scheduled to be polished clean next Friday, and the presidents of each club are to find a new place for our activities, should we feel the need to have a meeting that day. So, since I will live here, I thought that it's only natural to have our meeting in this house." Ria's explained conversationally. Issei's right eyebrow gave an unnoticeable twitch at the "since I will live here" part, but otherwise kept a cool facade as he thought about it for a few moments. It's not like one day of everyone here will bring the end of the world, considering that Akeno-san shows no negative reactions when around Ray-chan, so it should be good. A slight tingle on his spine told him that he had somehow jinxed himself from his thoughts alone, but chose to ignore it. "As long as everyone else in this house is alright with something like that, I don't mind." He responded airily, leaving his previous thoughts unsaid. Along with the fact that he expected her to act princess-y and that he thought that she had already arranged for the meeting to take place at his house, but just asked out of politeness. Ori didn't miss a beat to put in his 2 cents with a cheerful tone, knowing that his wife would agree with him. "It's as you said, Rias-chan. Since you live here," everyone missed Issei's eyebrow having another twitch at this. "You can have your meeting. Plus, Akane-chan and myself are more than curious to meet your fellow club members that are friends to you, Asia-chan and our Ice." Akane nodded excitedly in agreement but didn't say anything. "It'll be like a sleepover," Asia gushed excitedly. "I never had one of those, so this will be a great opportunity." "Oh, nice idea, Asia-chan." Akane agreed with the blonde ex-nun, with Goru sharing his wife's sentiment with an excited nod of his head. "I don't mind either," Rainer said simply with a careless shrug of her shoulders as she looked at the redhead. "Well, there you have it." Issei sighed tiredly as he started making his way out of the kitchen. "I'm gonna take a nap for the next couple of hours, so excuse me," he announced politely. While everyone was surprised at his abrupt exit, nobody could question his words because of his slightly slumped shoulders. Also, no one had ever seen him get tired in the first place, but chose not to point out something like that in case he got agitated. So, they kept their worry for his being in their minds. That said. "So, will you help me move in after your nap or tomorrow morning, Ice?" Rias asked cheekily, hoping to lighten him up. "After my nap. Tomorrow is our day off and I want to kick back and relax as much as possible." Issei replied casually without turning to look at her as he completely exited the kitchen and went towards the stairs. He didn't see the concerned frowns for his well-being and odd behavior that everyone on the table wore as they looked in his direction. He only cared about getting his well-deserved rest. And, in the back of his mind, he wondered why he felt a feeling of foreboding for the club's meeting next Friday. This is the end of the video. If you enjoyed the story, then hit the like button and comment your favorite part, but for now see you all in the next video.